The storage closet smelled like lemon polish and dust. Naomi Patterson pressed herself against the back wall, her breath shallow and silent as she peered through the narrow crack between the door and the frame. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the effort of staying completely still. The marble hallway outside stretched like a stage, and she had the worst seat in the house for a show she never wanted to see. Her husband Trevor stood 10 feet away, his back to her, his expensive suit jacket abandoned somewhere. The woman in his arms was unmistakable even from behind. Sienna Drake, the billionaire's fiancée, the woman everyone in this mansion feared, wore a silk dress that probably cost more than Naomi's old monthly salary. Her perfectly styled auburn hair cascaded down her back as she tilted her head up to meet Trevor's lips. The kiss was not gentle. It was hungry, familiar, practiced. This was not the first time, Naomi knew that now with absolute certainty. This was routine for them. Naomi's nails dug into her palms as she watched Trevor's hands slide down Sienna's waist, as she heard Sienna's low laugh echo in the empty hallway. The sound made Naomi's stomach turn. She had heard that laugh before on Trevor's phone during those late-night calls he thought she didn't notice. "Did you see that pathetic maid earlier?" Sienna's voice carried clearly through the silence. "The new one?" She practically trembled when I told her to clean the East Wing bathrooms again. Trevor chuckled, the sound intimate and cruel. "They're all terrified of you." "As they should be." Sienna pulled back slightly, running her fingers down Trevor's chest. "But soon we won't have to deal with any of them. Once Harrison and I are married, once the accounts are transferred, we'll have everything. The house in Monaco, the life we deserve." 3 more months, Trevor said, kissing her forehead. "Just 3 more months and we're free. Harrison will be drowning in FBI investigations, you'll be the innocent victim who was duped by her criminal husband, and we'll be on a beach somewhere spending his money." Sienna laughed again, that same cold, beautiful sound. "And your boring little wife will be crying in that mediocre house, wondering where her perfect husband went." Trevor's response was another kiss, deeper this time, his hands tangling in Sienna's hair. Naomi watched as they moved together, as Trevor pressed Sienna against the wall, as they forgot the world around them in their selfish passion. The storage closet suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Naomi closed her eyes and counted to 10, then 20, reminding herself why she was here. This was not the time to scream, to cry, to burst through the door and confront them. This was the time to watch, to document, to gather evidence. When she opened her eyes, Trevor and Sienna were walking away, Sienna's hand in Trevor's back pocket, both of them laughing about something Naomi couldn't hear. They disappeared around the corner toward the private quarters of the mansion, the section where only Sienna and Harrison had permission to enter. Naomi waited 5 full minutes before she pushed open the closet door. The hallway was empty, silent except for the distant hum of the mansion's expensive heating system. She smoothed down her plain black maid's uniform, tucked a strand of her dark hair back into the tight bun she wore for this disguise, and took a deep breath. Her real name was Naomi Patterson, though the employment paperwork in the mansion's office said she was Nicole Brown, a recent widow looking for steady work. She was 32 years old, had a degree in healthcare administration, and until 6 months ago she thought she had a happy marriage. She was wrong about so many things. The phone in her uniform pocket felt heavy. Inside it were 17 photographs taken over the past 3 weeks, 12 recorded conversations, and a growing folder of evidence that proved her husband was not only cheating on her but was actively helping his mistress commit fraud against one of the richest men in the state. Naomi walked down the hallway with the practiced invisibility of a good servant, eyes down, steps quick but not rushed. She had learned in her first week that maids who tried to be invisible were actually the most visible. The trick was to move with purpose, to look busy but not interesting, to be part of the mansion's furniture. She passed the grand staircase with its crystal chandelier, past the library with its thousands of leather-bound books that no one ever read, past the formal dining room that seated 30 people but was used maybe twice a year. The Blake mansion was not a home. It was a monument to wealth, cold and perfect and empty. The staff quarters were in the West Wing, a section of the mansion that was comfortable but clearly separate from the luxury of the main house. Naomi shared a small but clean room with Geneva, another maid who had worked here for 5 years. Geneva was the first person who had shown Naomi kindness in this place, who had warned her about Sienna's temper and Harrison's oblivious nature. Geneva was sitting on her bed when Naomi entered, reading a romance novel with a bare-chested man on the cover. She looked up and immediately saw something in Naomi's face. "You saw something," Geneva said, closing her book. Naomi nodded slowly. She had been careful not to reveal her true identity to anyone, but Geneva was smart and observant. Over the past weeks, They had developed a cautious friendship, the kind that forms between people trapped in the same difficult situation. "I saw exactly what I came here to see," Naomi said quietly, sitting on her own bed across from Geneva. "And it's worse than I thought." Geneva leaned forward, her dark eyes concerned. "Are you going to tell me what this is really about? Because you're not a regular maid, Nicole. Or whatever your real name is. You're too educated, too careful, too focused." Naomi looked at Geneva for a long moment, weighing risks and benefits. She needed allies in this place, and Geneva had already proven herself trustworthy. More importantly, Geneva hated Sienna Drake with a passion that came from years of abuse and humiliation. "My real name is Naomi," she said finally. "And that man Sienna was kissing in the east hallway? That's my husband." Geneva's mouth fell open. "Your husband? Trevor Patterson. He's Harrison's personal attorney. Has been for 3 years." Naomi pulled out her phone and showed Geneva the wedding photo that was still her lock screen. Trevor in his tuxedo, Naomi in her white dress, both of them smiling on what she thought was the happiest day of her life. "We've been married for 7 years. Until 6 months ago, I thought we were happy." "That lawyer?" Geneva's voice rose slightly. "The one who comes here 3 times a week for meetings with Harrison? The one who always talks down to the staff?" "That's him." Naomi's voice was flat, drained of emotion. She had cried all her tears in the first month after finding the text messages. Now she just felt cold and determined. "I found messages on his phone. Suspicious texts about their plans, and soon everything will be different. He started working late every night, started treating me like I was invisible. I hired a private investigator who confirmed he was coming here to this mansion, during hours when Harrison was traveling. So you applied to work here as a maid. Under a fake name with fake references that a friend helped me create. I needed to see it for myself, to understand what was happening. And I needed evidence that would hold up in court." Geneva stood up and started pacing. "Sienna Drake is having an affair with your husband. It's more than an affair." Naomi pulled up the photos on her phone, the ones she had taken of documents left carelessly in Sienna's private office, the ones that showed account numbers and transaction records. "They're stealing from Harrison. Trevor is using his access as Harrison's attorney to move money into offshore accounts. They're planning to frame Harrison for tax fraud and embezzlement, then run away with millions once Sienna is legally married to him and has access to his accounts." The room went silent except for the distant sound of someone vacuuming in another part of the mansion. Geneva stared at the phone screen, her face pale. "How long have you known about the stealing?" Geneva asked. "I confirmed it 2 weeks ago. The affair I suspected before I came here, but the fraud, the embezzlement, that I only discovered after I started working here and got access to Sienna's office." Naomi took the phone back and locked it. "They're planning to leave in 3 months, right after the wedding. Trevor told me he has a big case that requires him to work closely with Harrison during this period. He thinks I'm too stupid to question it. You need to go to the police." "I will. But I need everything documented perfectly first. If I go too early, if there's any gap in the evidence, Trevor will use his legal skills to wiggle out of it. He'll blame everything on Sienna, or he'll claim he was just following Harrison's orders. I need proof that is so solid, so complete, that neither of them can escape it." Geneva sat back down, processing everything. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. Just keep being my friend, keep helping me learn the routines of this house. And if you see anything unusual, anything involving Sienna or anyone connected to her, tell me." "Done." Geneva's jaw was set, her anger visible. "I've worked here for 5 years and watched Sienna abuse every person who works in this mansion. She threw coffee in my face once because it wasn't hot enough. She got another maid fired because she saw her looking at Harrison. She's cruel and selfish, and I would love to see her destroyed." Naomi smiled for the first time that day, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then we're going to be very good friends." The rest of the evening passed in routine. Naomi served dinner in the formal dining room where Harrison Blake sat alone at one end of a table that could seat 30 people, eating his perfectly prepared meal while reading business reports on his tablet. He barely looked up when Naomi refilled his water glass. She wondered if he had any idea what was happening in his own house, if he knew that the woman he planned to marry was plotting his destruction. Probably not. Harrison Blake was in his 50s, handsome in that distinguished way that came from good genes and better wealth. He had made his fortune in technology investments and real estate, buying companies before they became successful and selling them for profits that most people couldn't imagine. He was known as a fair employer, a generous philanthropist, and a man who valued intelligence and hard work. He was also, apparently, completely blind to the viper he had invited into his bed. After dinner, Naomi cleaned the kitchen alongside 2 other staff members, all of them working in tired silence. It was nearly 9 in the evening when she finally returned to her shared room. Geneva was already asleep, her book face down on her chest, her reading light still on. Naomi sat on her bed and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through the photos again, the evidence of betrayal and crime. Tomorrow she would hide a recording device in Sienna's office, the one she had ordered online and had delivered to a post office box under her fake name. Tomorrow she would start gathering audio evidence to go with the documents and photos. Tomorrow she would take another step toward justice. But tonight she allowed herself 5 minutes of grief. 5 minutes to remember the man Trevor used to be, or the man she thought he was. 5 minutes to mourn the marriage she thought she had. Then she deleted those thoughts the same way she would delete Trevor from her life. Revenge was not about anger, she had learned. Revenge was about patience, about planning, about making sure that when the hammer fell, it fell exactly where you wanted it to. Naomi Patterson was good at planning. She had built a career on organization and strategic thinking. She would bring those skills to this situation. 3 months until Trevor and Sienna planned to escape. That gave Naomi 3 months to build her case, to gather every piece of evidence, to prepare for the moment when she would reveal everything. She would not confront them early. She would not scream or cry or beg for explanations. She would wait and watch and document, and when the time was right, she would strike with precision that would leave both of them destroyed. Naomi turned off her light and lay down in the narrow bed. In the darkness, she could hear Geneva's soft snoring, the distant sound of traffic from the street outside, the expensive silence of a mansion that held too many secrets. She thought about Trevor's hands on Sienna's waist, about their laughter as they mocked her, about their plans to steal millions and disappear while leaving her behind to pick up the pieces. She thought about all of it and felt nothing but cold determination. They thought she was pathetic. They thought she was boring. They thought she would never find out, and even if she did, they thought she would be too weak to fight back. They were wrong. And in 3 months, when their entire world came crashing down, they would understand exactly how wrong they were. Naomi would make sure of it. The Garden Café had been Naomi's favorite spot in the city, a little oasis where she met friends for brunch on lazy Sunday mornings. The food was overpriced but delicious, the coffee was perfect, and the outdoor seating area was surrounded by flowering trees that made everything feel peaceful and right. That particular Sunday morning, 6 months before she would hide in a storage closet watching her husband kiss another woman, Naomi had been happy. Genuinely, completely happy. She sat across from her best friend Janelle, both of them laughing about something silly, both of them enjoying the rare spring sunshine. "So have you and Trevor talked about starting a family yet?" Janelle asked, stealing a strawberry from Naomi's plate. "You've been married 7 years. You're not getting any younger." Naomi had smiled at that, the same smile she would later realize was naive and trusting. "We've been talking about it. Trevor wants to wait until he makes partner at his firm. He says he wants to be able to provide the best life possible for our children." "Trevor always was practical," Janelle said, though there was something in her tone that Naomi didn't catch at the time. "But you're 32, Naomi. Your eggs have an expiration date." "Thanks for that reminder." Naomi had laughed, taking a sip of her coffee. "But seriously, I think we're almost there. He's been working so hard lately, taking on all these high-profile clients. His boss told him that a partnership announcement might come this summer." What Naomi didn't mention, what she pushed to the back of her mind as an unimportant detail, was that Trevor had been working late almost every night for the past 2 months. That he came home smelling like expensive perfume sometimes, claiming it was for meetings with female clients. That he had changed the password on his phone and become protective of it in a way he never had before. Those details seemed unimportant at the time. Trevor was building his career. Trevor was working toward their future. Of course he was tired, of course he was distracted. That was what ambitious men did when they were trying to achieve their goals. After brunch, Naomi had gone home to the house she shared with Trevor, a modest but beautiful Cape Cod-style home in a quiet neighborhood. They had bought it 5 years earlier, stretching their budget to afford something in a good school district even though they didn't have children yet. Naomi had loved that house from the moment she saw it, loved the bay windows in the living room, the modern kitchen with its granite countertops, the small backyard where she imagined future children playing. Trevor's car was not in the driveway when she got home, even though it was Sunday afternoon. Naomi had sent him a text asking where he was, and he had responded 30 minutes later saying he was at the office preparing for a big meeting on Monday. She remembered believing him without question. Why wouldn't she? In 7 years of marriage, Trevor had never given her a reason to doubt him. He had been faithful, attentive, loving. He remembered her birthday, brought her flowers for no reason, kissed her goodbye every morning before work. They didn't fight often, and when they did, they resolved things quickly and fairly. Naomi had spent that afternoon doing laundry, meal prepping for the week, answering work emails from her job as a hospital administrator. She loved her work, loved the challenge of managing complex medical facilities, loved making a difference in how healthcare was delivered. She was good at her job, successful and respected. She made decent money, enough that combined with Trevor's salary they lived comfortably. Trevor had come home around 7 that evening, looking exhausted but pleased. "The meeting prep went well," he had said, kissing her cheek. "I think we're going to win this client." They had eaten leftover pasta together, watched a movie on the couch, gone to bed early. Normal, comfortable, boring in the best possible way. That was what Naomi thought their life was, what she thought their marriage would always be. The first crack appeared 3 days later, on a Wednesday evening. Naomi had been reviewing patient satisfaction surveys at home when Trevor's phone, left charging on the kitchen counter, had buzzed with a text message. The notification preview appeared on the lock screen, visible from where Naomi sat. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. Make sure you're not late this time, my love." Naomi had stared at that message for a full minute, her brain refusing to process what she was seeing. There had to be an explanation. It was probably from his mother. Or his sister. Or a confused friend who sent the message to the wrong person. But Trevor's mother called him honey, not my love. And his sister was married with 3 kids and never said anything remotely romantic to anyone. And Trevor's friends were all happily married men who talked about sports and work, not about seeing each other tomorrow night. Naomi had picked up the phone, her hands shaking slightly. The lock screen showed the message was from a contact saved simply as S. No name, no emoji, just a letter. She tried to open the phone to read the full conversation but found that Trevor had changed his password from the simple 4-digit code they had shared since they got married. When Trevor had come downstairs from his shower 10 minutes later, Naomi had held out the phone. "You have a message from someone called S. They said they can't wait to see you tomorrow night." Trevor's face had done something strange then, something that Naomi would remember clearly 6 months later when she was watching him kiss Sienna Drake in a mansion hallway. His expression had frozen for just a second, his eyes calculating, before smoothing into confused innocence. "That's weird," he had said, taking the phone from her. "Must be a spam message or something." It said, "Make sure you're not late this time, my love." Naomi had kept her voice calm, reasonable. "That doesn't sound like spam." Trevor had looked at the message, his face perfectly confused. "Oh, that's Sarah from work. She's always sending these flirty messages to everyone. It's just how she talks, you know how some women are. Super inappropriate but harmless. You have her saved as just S? I have a lot of contacts. I probably saved her that way by accident when I was rushing. Honestly, Naomi, it's nothing. Sarah is married with 2 kids. She's just naturally flirty." The explanation had been smooth, delivered with perfect sincerity. And Naomi, who had never had a reason to distrust her husband, who had built 7 years of marriage on foundation of honesty and respect, had chosen to believe him. She pushed down the small voice in her head that said something was wrong, that said men don't save harmless work colleagues as single letters, that said Trevor's expression had revealed more than his words. "Okay," she had said. It seems strange." Trevor had pulled her into a hug, kissed the top of her head. "I know how it looked. But I promise you there's nothing going on. You're the only woman I love, the only woman I want. You know that, right?" She had nodded against his chest, feeling foolish for doubting him. "I know." But that night, after Trevor had fallen asleep, Naomi had lain awake thinking about that message. The more she thought about it, the less sense Trevor's explanation made. If Sarah was just a flirty coworker, why would Trevor hide her contact behind an initial? Why would she talk about seeing him tomorrow night when Trevor had told Naomi he had no plans for Thursday evening? Why had Trevor changed his phone password? The doubts grew over the following weeks. Naomi started noticing things she had ignored before. The way Trevor always kept his phone face down on tables. The way he took calls in another room, claiming they were confidential work matters. The nights he came home late smelling like expensive perfume, always with explanations about client dinners or business meetings. She started checking his car for evidence, his jacket pockets, his credit card statements. She found nothing concrete, just more questions. Restaurant charges at places they had never been together. Gaps in his schedule that didn't match his explanations. A receipt for jewelry that she had never received. 2 months after the first text message, Naomi had done something she never thought she would do. She had hired a private investigator, a woman named Patricia who came highly recommended by Janelle's divorce lawyer cousin. Patricia was professional, direct, and expensive. "I need to know if my husband is cheating on me," Naomi had said in Patricia's small office. "And if he is, I need proof that will hold up in court." Patricia had asked the standard questions about Trevor's schedule, his habits, his usual excuses. She had taken photos of Trevor, recorded his license plate number, noted his daily routines. Then she had given Naomi the advice that Naomi would later realize changed everything. "If he's cheating, we'll find out. But you need to be prepared for what we might discover. Sometimes the affair is just an affair. Sometimes it's connected to other things, other betrayals. Are you ready to know the truth, whatever it is?" Naomi had nodded, her jaw set. "I need to know." Patricia's investigation had taken 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which Naomi went through the motions of her normal life, working at the hospital, coming home to cook dinner, sleeping next to a man she no longer trusted. It was like living in a play, pretending everything was fine while knowing the stage was about to collapse. The day Patricia called with her findings, Naomi had been at work reviewing quarterly budget reports. She had taken the call in her office with the door closed, bracing herself for bad news. "Your husband is having an affair," Patricia had said bluntly, "with a woman named Sienna Drake. I've followed him to her location 17 times in the past 3 weeks. He enters through a private entrance, stays for 2 to 4 hours and leaves. The location is a mansion in the north end of the city, owned by billionaire Harrison Blake. Based on property records and social media, Sienna Drake is Harrison Blake's fiancée." Naomi had felt like she was falling even though she was sitting down. She had expected the affair, had braced herself for that pain. But the rest of it made no sense. Why would my husband be having an affair with a billionaire's fiancée? "That's what I asked myself," Patricia had said. "So I did some more digging. Your husband Trevor is Harrison Blake's personal attorney. He has legitimate reasons to visit the mansion for business meetings. But his visits happen during hours when Blake is traveling or away from the property. And based on surveillance, Trevor enters through the service entrance and goes directly to the private residential section of the mansion, not to Blake's office." The pieces had started coming together in Naomi's mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. They're using his legitimate business access as cover for the affair. That would be my assessment. Blake travels extensively for business. When he's gone, Trevor visits his fiancée. It's actually quite clever from a logistical standpoint. Naomi had thanked Patricia, paid her final invoice, and sat alone in her office for an hour trying to process everything. Her husband was having an affair with one of the richest women in the state, a woman who was engaged to one of Trevor's most important clients. The risk, the stupidity, the betrayal of it all was overwhelming. That night, Trevor had come home at his usual time, kissed her cheek, asked about her day. And Naomi, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, had not confronted him. She had not screamed or cried or demanded explanations. She had simply observed him with new eyes, seeing a stranger where her husband used to be. Over the next weeks, Naomi had developed her plan. She couldn't just divorce Trevor based on proof of infidelity. She wanted him to lose everything the way she had lost everything. She wanted consequences that matched the scale of his betrayal. And some instinct told her that there was more to this situation than just an affair, that Trevor's relationship with Sienna Drake involved something darker than simple adultery. So Naomi had made her decision. She would go undercover, get inside the Blake mansion and find out exactly what Trevor and Sienna were planning. And when she had all the evidence she needed, she would destroy them both completely. That was 6 months ago. Now, Naomi understood that her instincts had been correct. Trevor wasn't just having an affair. He was helping Sienna commit fraud, embezzle money, frame an innocent man. The betrayal was deeper and darker than anything Naomi could have imagined. But she also knew that she was stronger than she had been 6 months ago. The grief and shock had hardened into something focused and powerful. She was no longer the naive woman who believed her husband's lies. She was someone new, someone capable of playing the long game, someone who would see justice done no matter what it took. As Naomi lay in her narrow bed in the staff quarters, she thought about that garden cafe where she had been so happy and clueless. She thought about the woman she used to be, the woman who trusted completely and loved freely. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood that trust had to be earned and that betrayal had consequences. She did not miss that old version of herself. That woman had been weak, gullible, easy to deceive. This new version of Naomi was something different, something better. This version would never be anyone's victim again. Tomorrow she would continue her work as a maid, continue gathering evidence, continue preparing for the moment when everything would come crashing down on Trevor and Sienna. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember who she used to be, if only to appreciate how far she had come. The past was dead. The future was what mattered now. And Naomi's future would be built on the ashes of Trevor's lies. Getting hired as a maid at the Blake mansion had required careful planning and more than a little deception. Naomi had started by creating an entirely new identity, something she never imagined she would need to do in her law-abiding life. Her friend Janelle had a cousin who worked in HR at a large corporation, someone who understood how background checks worked and knew how to create a convincing work history. Together they had built a complete identity for Nicole Brown, a recent widow whose husband had died in a car accident, forcing her to seek steady employment after years as a stay-at-home wife. The fake story had layers of truth that made it convincing. Nicole Brown had worked various part-time jobs over the years, cleaning offices and homes for extra money. She had references from small companies that didn't keep meticulous records. She had a simple resume that showed reliability but not ambition, experience but not expertise. She was exactly the kind of employee that wealthy households hired to blend into the background. Naomi had researched the Blake Mansion's hiring practices and learned that they contracted with an agency that specialized in placing domestic workers. The agency had a decent reputation but was known for doing minimal background checks, focusing instead on interview skills and references. Perfect for someone trying to slip through the cracks. The hardest part had been the interview itself, sitting across from the agency representative and pretending to be someone simpler, less educated, more desperate than she actually was. Naomi had a master's degree in healthcare administration and had managed hospitals with budgets in the millions. But for the interview, she had worn cheap clothing from a thrift store, spoken in softer tones, and presented herself as someone grateful for any opportunity. "I just need steady work," she had said, wringing her hands nervously. "Since my husband passed, I've been struggling to keep up with bills. I'm willing to work hard, any hours you need. I'm good at cleaning and I don't cause trouble." The interviewer had barely looked at her credentials before nodding. "We have an opening at the Blake estate. It's a live-in position, 6 days a week. The pay is standard but includes room and board. The work is demanding and Mr. Blake's fiancé has high standards. Are you interested?" Naomi had forced herself to look grateful and relieved. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity." That had been 6 weeks ago. Since then, Naomi had been living in the mansion's staff quarters, sharing a room with Geneva, and learning everything she could about the household's routines and inhabitants. The Blake mansion employed 15 people full-time. There were 6 maids including Naomi and Geneva. There was Bernard, the estate manager, who oversaw all household operations. There was a chef and 2 kitchen assistants. There were 3 groundskeepers who maintained the extensive gardens and grounds. There was Harrison's personal driver and Sienna's personal assistant, both of whom lived off-site but worked long hours. The staff quarters were comfortable but clearly designed to keep servants separate from the family. The rooms were small but clean, the shared bathrooms were functional, and there was a common area with a television and some worn furniture. Meals were provided in a staff dining room, simple but adequate food prepared by the kitchen staff after Harrison and Sienna had been served. The hierarchy among the staff was clear. Bernard stood at the top, followed by the chef, then the senior maids, then everyone else. Geneva had been working there for 5 years, which gave her seniority among the maids and a certain level of respect from the others. She had taken Naomi under her wing from the first day, showing her the house's layout and warning her about Sienna's moods. "Miss Drake is very particular," Geneva had said on Naomi's first morning. "She wants things done a specific way and she will notice if something is wrong. Don't make eye contact unless she speaks to you directly. Don't ask questions. Don't offer suggestions. Just do what you're told and try to be invisible." Naomi had nodded obediently, playing her role. "I understand. I won't cause any problems." Over the following weeks, Naomi had learned that Geneva's warnings about Sienna were understated. Sienna Drake was not just particular or demanding. She was cruel in calculated ways that seemed designed to assert dominance rather than maintain standards. Naomi had watched Sienna scream at another maid for leaving a single water spot on a bathroom mirror, had seen her throw a breakfast tray at the chef because the eggs were slightly overdone, had witnessed her fire Sienna's personal assistant in front of the entire staff for forgetting to make a hair appointment. The staff lived in constant fear of Sienna's temper. They moved through the mansion like ghosts, trying to anticipate her needs before she could find fault. Turnover was high. In the 6 weeks Naomi had worked there, 3 employees had quit rather than endure more abuse. Harrison Blake, in contrast, was almost never seen. He spent most of his time traveling for business or locked in his private office working. When Naomi did see him, he was polite to the staff, thanking them for their service and treating them with basic respect. He seemed genuinely unaware of how Sienna treated the people who worked for them. This dynamic had given Naomi important insights. Harrison was not a bad man, just an oblivious one. He was so focused on his business empire that he had outsourced the running of his household to Sienna, trusting her completely and never questioning her methods. He had no idea that his fiancée was stealing from him, cheating on him, and planning his destruction. Naomi had started gathering evidence slowly and carefully. Her first week she had simply observed, learning routines and identifying opportunities. Her second week she had started taking photos of documents that Sienna left in her private office, things that Naomi could access while cleaning. Her third week she had started recording conversations using a small device hidden in her uniform. The evidence painted a clear picture. Sienna and Trevor were having an affair, meeting several times a week when Harrison was traveling. They were also systematically embezzling money from Harrison's business accounts, using Trevor's access as Harrison's attorney to create fake transactions and shift funds to offshore accounts. They had forged documents that would make it appear Harrison was the one committing fraud, setting him up to take the fall when their theft was discovered. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sienna would marry Harrison in 3 months, giving her legal access to his accounts and assets. Immediately after the wedding, anonymous tips would be sent to the FBI about Harrison's supposed financial crimes. While Harrison was arrested and his accounts were frozen pending investigation, Sienna would claim to be a shocked victim and request an emergency divorce. Trevor would help her navigate the legal system to protect her assets from Harrison's criminal proceedings. And then, once the dust settled, Sienna and Trevor would disappear with millions of dollars to a country with no extradition treaty. It was bold, criminal, and would have worked if Naomi had not been there to document everything. The irony was that Trevor's own betrayal had created the witness who would destroy him. If he had simply divorced Naomi before starting the affair, if he had been honest instead of deceptive, none of this would have happened. But he had underestimated her, had thought she was too weak and too loyal to ever be a threat. That miscalculation would cost him everything. Naomi's plan was to continue gathering evidence until she had an airtight case against both of them. She needed phone records, financial documents, recorded conversations, and photographs that proved the affair and the fraud. She needed evidence that was so comprehensive that no lawyer, not even Trevor with all his skills, could create reasonable doubt. Once she had everything, she would go to the FBI with the financial crimes evidence and to a divorce attorney with the proof of adultery. She would time everything perfectly, waiting until right before the wedding when Trevor and Sienna would be most confident and least suspicious. Then she would strike all at once, destroying both of their futures in a single coordinated attack. But she would not do it alone. Naomi had learned that revenge was better executed with allies, and she had found willing partners in Geneva and Bernard. Geneva hated Sienna with a passion that came from years of abuse. On Naomi's 4th week, after watching Sienna throw hot coffee at Geneva for not delivering her mail fast enough, Naomi had made the decision to trust her with the truth. She had waited until late at night when they were both in their shared room. Geneva had been crying quietly, pressing ice to the burn on her arm where the coffee had hit her. Naomi had sat beside her and said, "I can help you get revenge on her if you're willing to help me." Geneva had looked at her with swollen eyes. "What do you mean?" And Naomi had told her everything. Her real identity, her husband's affair with Sienna, the fraud they were committing, her plan to gather evidence and destroy them both. She had showed Geneva the photos and recordings, the proof that Naomi was exactly who she claimed to be. "I need your help," Naomi had said. "I need someone who knows this house, who can tell me when Sienna will be in certain places, who can help me access things without raising suspicion. In exchange, I'll make sure that when this all comes out, everyone will know how Sienna treated you and the rest of the staff. She won't just lose her money and her freedom. She'll lose her reputation too." Geneva had stared at her for a long moment before a smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile Naomi had seen from her. "I'll help you destroy that woman. Whatever you need." Bernard had been harder to convince. As the estate manager, he had more to lose and was naturally more cautious. But he also had access to parts of the mansion that maids could not easily enter, and he had information about Harrison's schedule and business dealings that would be valuable. Naomi had approached him carefully, during a quiet moment when they were both in the staff kitchen. "Bernard, can I ask you something in confidence?" He had looked at her with wariness. "What? Do you trust Miss Drake?" His expression had changed, becoming guarded. That's not an appropriate question for staff to discuss. I know. But I'm not asking as staff to staff. I'm asking as someone who is trying to stop a crime from being committed against Mr. Blake. That had gotten his attention. Bernard had led her to his small office off the main kitchen and closed the door. What are you talking about? Naomi had showed him a fraction of her evidence, enough to prove she was serious but not enough to implicate herself if Bernard reported her. She had explained about the affair, the embezzlement, the plan to frame Harrison for crimes he didn't commit. Bernard had listened in silence, his face growing darker with each revelation. When Naomi finished, he had sat down heavily in his chair. Mr. Blake is a good man, Bernard had said quietly. He treats us well, pays fairly, respects the work we do. He doesn't deserve this. I agree. That's why I'm trying to stop it. But I need help from people who know this household and can help me gather the evidence I need. You're putting me in a difficult position. If I help you and this goes wrong, I'll lose my job and possibly face legal consequences. If you don't help me and this goes forward, Mr. Blake will lose everything and possibly end up in prison for crimes he didn't commit. Sienna and Trevor will get away with millions of dollars. And all of us will lose our jobs anyway when the estate is seized by federal investigators. Bernard had thought about this for a long time before nodding slowly. What do you need from me? Between the three of them, Naomi, Geneva, and Bernard had formed an effective team. Geneva provided information about Sienna's daily schedule and helped Naomi access restricted areas. Bernard provided copies of financial documents that passed through his office and alerted Naomi when Harrison would be traveling, creating opportunities to observe Trevor and Sienna together. Together they built a case that was comprehensive and damning. They were careful never to meet openly or communicate in ways that could be traced. They used burner phones purchased with cash. They never discussed their plans where they could be overheard. They continued to act as loyal, invisible staff members while quietly documenting every crime and betrayal happening under the mansion's roof. The work was exhausting and stressful. Naomi was living a double life, pretending to be a simple maid while actually conducting a complex investigation. She had to watch Trevor kiss Sienna, had to hear them laugh about their plans, had to serve them food and clean their rooms while knowing exactly what they were doing. It took every ounce of her self-control not to confront them, not to scream at Trevor for what he had done to their marriage. But Naomi had learned patience. She had learned that revenge was a dish best served cold, that justice required precision, that destroying your enemies meant waiting for the perfect moment to strike. So she waited and watched and gathered evidence, and prepared for the day when everything would come crashing down. 3 months, Trevor had said. 3 months until the wedding, until they would execute their plan and disappear with their stolen millions. That gave Naomi 3 months to build an unbreakable case against them. 3 months to make sure that when they fell so hard they would never get back up. The game was in motion. The players were in position. And Naomi Patterson, the woman they thought was pathetic and boring, was about to show them exactly what she was capable of achieving. The recording device was smaller than Naomi expected, about the size of a quarter and thin enough to slip between the pages of a book. She had ordered it online using a prepaid debit card and had it delivered to a post office box rented under her fake identity. The device could record for up to 8 hours on a single charge and transmitted audio to an app on her phone. It was exactly what she needed to capture Trevor and Sienna's conversations in places where Naomi couldn't be present. On a Tuesday morning when Sienna was at a spa appointment and Harrison was on a business trip to Chicago, Naomi had slipped into Sienna's private office to plant the device. Geneva had acted as lookout, positioned at the end of the hallway where she could see anyone approaching and send Naomi a warning text if necessary. The office was exactly what Naomi expected from Sienna: expensive, beautiful, and cold. Everything was white and chrome, from the modern desk to the leather chair to the abstract art on the walls. The only splash of color came from fresh flowers in a crystal vase, replaced daily whether they were wilted or not. Naomi had worked quickly, hiding the recording device behind a row of leather-bound books on the shelf closest to Sienna's desk. The device was voice-activated, meaning it would only record when people were speaking, conserving battery life and making it easier to sort through the audio later. She had tested it twice to make sure it worked, then carefully rearranged the books to look exactly as they had before. The whole operation took less than 3 minutes. When Geneva sent the all-clear signal, Naomi had slipped out of the office and returned to her normal cleaning duties as if nothing had happened. Her heart had been racing, but her hands had been steady. She was getting better at this, more confident in her ability to move through the mansion unseen and gather what she needed. The recording device paid off immediately. That same afternoon, Trevor had arrived at the mansion during one of his scheduled meetings with Harrison. But instead of going to Harrison's office as would be appropriate for a business meeting, Trevor had gone directly to Sienna's private quarters. The recording device captured everything. "Did you transfer the money from the Chicago account?" That was Sienna's voice, sharp and businesslike. "Done yesterday. 200,000 moved to the secondary offshore account in the Caymans. I created fake invoices for consulting services to make it look legitimate in case anyone reviews the transactions." Trevor sounded pleased with himself. "That brings our total to just over 4 million. We need at least 6 million before the wedding. That's the number we agreed on. And we'll get there. Harrison has a major deal closing next month. Once that money hits his accounts, I'll move another chunk to our accounts. He won't even notice it's missing until we're long gone." There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of kissing. Naomi had listened to the recording in the privacy of her room that night, her face emotionless even as her stomach churned with disgust and anger. She forced herself to listen to every word, to take notes, to document timestamps and specific details that would be important for the legal case she was building. "Have you thought about what you're going to tell your wife?" Sienna's voice on the recording was mocking, cruel. "Poor little Naomi. How will she survive without her precious husband? I'll leave her a note. Something vague about needing to find myself. She'll cry for a few weeks and then move on. She's weak like that, always been too emotional. Did she ever suspect anything?" "Once. She saw a text from you on my phone. But I told her you were just a flirty coworker and she believed me like the idiot she is. Naomi trusts me completely. It's almost too easy." Naomi had paused the recording at that point, taking a moment to breathe through the fury that threatened to overwhelm her. Trevor thought she was weak. He thought she was an idiot. He thought she would simply cry and move on while he lived in luxury with another woman on money he had stolen. The rage that filled her in that moment was different from anything she had felt before. It was cold and focused, a burning ice that sharpened her thinking rather than clouding it. She would prove to Trevor exactly how wrong he was about her. She would show him that underestimating her was the biggest mistake of his life. Over the following weeks, Naomi's collection of evidence grew exponentially. The recording device captured dozens of conversations between Trevor and Sienna, discussing their affair, their theft, their plans for the future. Naomi also managed to photograph financial documents from both Sienna's office and from folders that Trevor sometimes left in the mansion's library during his visits. The documents showed a pattern of systematic theft stretching back nearly a year. Trevor had been using his position as Harrison's personal attorney to slowly drain money from various accounts, creating fake expenses and fraudulent transactions that redirected funds to offshore accounts controlled by him and Sienna. They had been careful to take small amounts from different sources, nothing large enough to trigger immediate red flags, but the total added up to millions of dollars. They had also created a complex web of false documentation designed to frame Harrison for the theft. There were fake emails from Harrison's account authorizing suspicious transactions. There were forged signatures on documents that made it appear Harrison was aware of and directing the embezzlement. There were planted evidence in Harrison's personal files that would make him look guilty of tax evasion and money laundering. The sophistication of their scheme was actually impressive from a purely technical standpoint. Trevor had used his legal knowledge and access to create a nearly perfect frame job. If not for Naomi's investigation, Harrison Blake would have ended up in federal prison while Sienna and Trevor lived comfortably on his stolen money. But Naomi was documenting everything, building a countercase that would not only prove Harrison's innocence but would demonstrate exactly how Trevor and Sienna had committed their crimes. She was collecting the rope they would use to hang themselves. Geneva and Bernard continued to provide crucial support. Geneva had access to Sienna's personal calendar and could tell Naomi when Sienna would be away from the mansion, creating opportunities for Naomi to search her office more thoroughly. Bernard had access to security camera footage and could help Naomi verify movements and meetings that corroborated what she was hearing on her recordings. "I found something you need to see," Bernard had said to Naomi one evening, pulling her into his office and closing the door. He had pulled up video footage on his computer from 3 weeks earlier. "This is from the night Harrison proposed to Sienna. Watch what happens after he goes to bed." The footage showed Sienna alone in the mansion's grand living room after Harrison had retired for the evening. She paced for a few minutes, then pulled out her phone and made a call. The security cameras didn't record audio, but Naomi could see Sienna's face clearly, see her smiling and laughing. A few minutes later, Trevor had entered through the mansion's side entrance, the one used by staff and service providers. He had gone straight to Sienna, and they had kissed while she held up her hand to show him the enormous diamond engagement ring. They had been celebrating together, Trevor and Sienna, on the night she got engaged to another man. The cruelty of it, the arrogance, made Naomi's blood boil even months later watching the security footage. "Does Harrison know Trevor was here that night?" Naomi asked. "No. I reviewed the sign-in logs. Trevor's not listed as entering the property. He must have a key to that side entrance. Can you make me a copy of this footage?" "Already done." Bernard handed her a USB drive, along with recordings from 17 other nights when Trevor entered the mansion during suspicious hours. "I've documented every unauthorized entry he's made in the past 6 months." Naomi had squeezed Bernard's shoulder gratefully. "Thank you. This is exactly what I need." As the weeks passed, Naomi's case became ironclad. She had financial documents, audio recordings, video evidence, photographs, and detailed notes documenting every aspect of Trevor and Sienna's crimes. She had proof of the affair, proof of the embezzlement, proof of the frame job, proof of everything they had done. But she also had to be careful not to tip her hand too early. Trevor was still a skilled attorney and Sienna was clever and ruthless. If they suspected they were being investigated, they might destroy evidence, change their plans, or find ways to implicate Naomi herself in their schemes. She had to wait for the perfect moment, the point of no return when they would be so confident in their success that they wouldn't see the trap closing around them. That moment would come at the wedding. Naomi had learned from Geneva that the wedding was planned as a massive event at the mansion, with 300 guests, a famous celebrity chef handling the catering and coverage in society magazines. Sienna wanted the world to see her marrying one of the state's richest men, wanted to establish her position and legitimacy before pulling off the final part of her con. The wedding would be the perfect time to expose everything. Trevor and Sienna would be surrounded by witnesses, by business associates and society figures and potential future employers. When their crimes were revealed in that public setting, there would be no way to hide, no way to spin the story in their favor. They would be destroyed completely and publicly. Naomi just had to survive until then, had to maintain her cover as a humble maid while knowing exactly what was happening behind the mansion's expensive walls. It was exhausting work, emotionally draining in ways she hadn't anticipated. Some nights she lay awake in her narrow bed, thinking about the 7 years she had spent married to Trevor, wondering if any of it had been real or if it had all been a lie from the beginning. She thought about the morning he had proposed to her, down on one knee in the park where they had their first date, telling her she was the love of his life. She thought about their wedding day, the promises they had made to each other in front of family and friends. She thought about all the small moments of their marriage, lazy Sunday mornings in bed, road trips to the mountains, quiet evenings cooking dinner together. Had any of those moments been genuine? Or had Trevor been planning his escape even then, looking at her and seeing only a convenient cover for his real ambitions? Naomi didn't know, and increasingly she realized it didn't matter. The man she thought she married had never existed. Trevor was a liar, a thief and a cheat. Whatever genuine feelings he might have once had for her had been erased by his greed and selfishness. Letting go of that past version of their relationship was painful but necessary. Naomi couldn't move forward while still clinging to memories of a marriage that had been built on lies. She had to accept that she had been deceived, that she had loved a fiction, that the real Trevor was someone she barely recognized. But she could also take comfort in knowing that she was stronger now than she had ever been. The woman who had cried over that first suspicious text message would not have been capable of the investigation Naomi had conducted. That woman would have confronted Trevor immediately, would have demanded explanations, would have probably been convinced by his smooth lies to give him another chance. This new version of Naomi was different. She was patient, strategic, ruthless when necessary. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to channel her anger into productive action rather than letting it consume her. She had learned to play the long game, to sacrifice immediate gratification for ultimate victory. Trevor and Sienna thought they were so clever. They thought they had planned everything perfectly, that they were pulling off the con of the century. They had no idea that their victim's invisible maid was actually the wronged wife who was documenting their every move, building a case that would send them both to prison. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Trevor's affair with Sienna was going to destroy him, but not in the way he expected. His relationship with her would end not in beaches and luxury but in handcuffs and court dates. And Naomi, the wife he thought was too weak and emotional to be a threat, would be the one who brought him down. 2 months until the wedding. 2 months to maintain her cover, to gather any final pieces of evidence she might need, to coordinate with the authorities and attorneys who would help her execute the final phase of her plan. 2 months of watching Trevor kiss Sienna, of hearing them mock her, of serving them meals and cleaning their rooms while they destroyed Harrison Blake's life and planned their escape. Naomi could survive 2 more months. She had survived everything else. And when the wedding day came, when Trevor and Sienna stood in front of 300 guests celebrating their victory, that was when Naomi would strike. That was when she would reveal everything and watch their entire world collapse. She thought about Trevor's words from the recording. She'll cry for a few weeks and then move on. She's weak like that. No, Trevor. You're wrong about everything. I won't cry. I won't move on in the way you expect. I'll move on by destroying you completely and building a better life from the ruins of what you tried to take from me. Naomi smiled in the darkness of her room, a cold smile that would have terrified Trevor if he could have seen it. Let them think she was weak. Let them think she was defeated. Let them believe their lies right up until the moment when the truth came crashing down on them like a tidal wave. The lion's den was comfortable for those who thought they were the predators. But sometimes the prey was more dangerous than anyone realized. And Naomi Patterson was done being prey. The manila folder was labeled Blake Holdings Q3 Financial Review, but the documents inside had nothing to do with legitimate business. Naomi had found the folder in Sienna's private office during one of her authorized cleaning sessions, tucked into a drawer that was usually locked but had been carelessly left open that morning. Inside were bank statements for accounts in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Singapore. Spreadsheets tracking money transfers that totaled over $5 million. Handwritten notes and Trevor's distinctive slanted script detailing the timeline for the final phase of their scheme. And most damning of all, draft emails that would be sent to the FBI and IRS after the wedding, providing anonymous tips about Harrison Blake's supposed financial crimes. Naomi had photographed every page with her phone, her hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. This was the smoking gun, the proof that connected every thread of Trevor and Sienna's conspiracy. With these documents, there would be no way for either of them to claim ignorance or argue that the money transfers were legitimate business transactions. She had carefully replaced everything exactly as she found it, making sure the folder was in the same position, the drawer at the same angle. Then she had continued with her cleaning as if nothing had happened, dusting shelves and vacuuming carpets while her mind raced with the implications of what she had discovered. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. This wasn't just an affair and some opportunistic theft. Trevor and Sienna had planned every detail of Harrison's destruction with meticulous care. They had spent months building a framework that would make Harrison look guilty of crimes he didn't commit. They had created fake email accounts that mimicked Harrison's writing style. They had backdated documents to suggest his criminal behavior had been ongoing for years. They had even planted evidence on his personal computer that would be discovered during the FBI's inevitable investigation. Once Harrison was arrested, his assets would be frozen pending trial. Sienna, as his wife, would claim victim status and petition for emergency access to protect her finances from his criminal enterprise. Trevor, as a trusted attorney, would help her navigate the legal system and shield the offshore accounts from seizure. By the time anyone figured out what had really happened, Trevor and Sienna would have vanished to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving Harrison to spend decades in federal prison for crimes he didn't commit. It was brilliant in a horrible way, and it would have worked if Naomi hadn't been there to document everything. Her presence in the mansion, her access to both Sienna's private spaces and Trevor's unguarded moments, had given her a complete view of their conspiracy. She knew things that even they didn't realize anyone could know. That evening, after her shift ended, Naomi met with Geneva and Bernard in Bernard's small office. She showed them the photographs of the documents she had found, explaining the significance of each piece of evidence. "This is enough to send them both to prison for years," Bernard said, his voice grim. "Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, identity theft, extortion. The federal charges alone will mean serious time." "How long until the wedding?" Geneva asked. 8 weeks, Naomi said. "That's when they're planning to execute the final phase. Trevor has already drafted the anonymous tips that will be sent to the authorities. He's coordinated the timing so that Harrison will be arrested at his office, in front of his employees and business partners, causing maximum damage to his reputation." "What's your plan?" Bernard leaned forward, his expression intense. "When are you going to expose them?" "At the wedding. I'm going to let them go through with the ceremony, let them think they've won. Then, when they're surrounded by 300 guests, when they're at the height of their arrogance and confidence, I'm going to reveal everything." Geneva's eyes widened. "That's going to be a disaster. A beautiful disaster." "It needs to be public," Naomi explained. "If I go to the authorities now, Trevor will use his legal skills to create doubt, to delay proceedings, maybe even to destroy evidence. But if I expose them at the wedding in front of witnesses, with irrefutable proof, there will be no escaping it. And Harrison will see exactly who he was about to marry, what kind of person Sienna really is. What do you need from us? Bernard asked. I need you to help me get access to the wedding's audiovisual system. I want to play recordings and show documents on the screens they're using for the ceremony. I want everyone to hear Trevor and Sienna discussing their crimes. I want them to see the bank statements, the forged documents, the evidence of the affair. I want it to be undeniable. Bernard nodded slowly. The AV system is being handled by an outside company, but I oversee all vendor contracts. I can get you access to the control room during the ceremony. I can make sure you have what you need. There's also the matter of making sure Harrison is present to see it all, Geneva added. What if he's traveling that day? What if he's not at the wedding for some reason? I'll handle that, Naomi said. I'm going to contact Harrison's executive assistant and feed her information that will make sure he's present and paying attention. But I need to do it carefully without revealing who I really am or what I know. They spent the next hour planning the details of the wedding day reveal. It would require perfect timing, coordination, and a bit of luck. But if they pulled it off, the result would be spectacular. Trevor and Sienna would be publicly exposed in front of everyone they knew, their crimes revealed in the most humiliating way possible. Naomi left Bernard's office feeling energized and focused. She was getting close now, close to the moment when all her work would pay off. Close to justice. But there was one more thing she needed to do before the wedding. She needed to secure her own future, make sure that when Trevor's life fell apart, hers was protected. She needed to start building the next chapter of her life, independent of anything connected to her soon-to-be ex-husband. The next day, on her day off from the mansion, Naomi met with Nicole Chen, the attorney friend who had been helping her navigate the legal aspects of her situation. Nicole's office was in downtown, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows and contemporary art on the walls. I have everything I need to destroy them, Naomi said, sliding a USB drive across Nicole's desk. Audio recordings, financial documents, video evidence, everything. The question is, how do I make sure I come out of this protected? Nicole plugged in the drive and spent 20 minutes reviewing the evidence. Her expression grew progressively more shocked as she went through file after file. This is extraordinary, Nicole said finally. The level of detail, the comprehensiveness of what you've gathered. You could teach a class to FBI agents on conducting investigations. I just want to make sure Trevor can't hurt me anymore. Legally, financially, anyway. With this evidence, you're in a very strong position. First, we file for divorce with proof of adultery. That gives you grounds for a fault-based divorce, which in this state means you're entitled to a larger share of marital assets and alimony. Second, you can sue Trevor for emotional distress and potentially for fraud, since he was essentially stealing money that would have benefited your marriage. Third, once Trevor is criminally charged, his assets will likely be frozen, but we can move quickly to separate your finances and protect anything you're entitled to. What about the house? You have a strong claim to the marital home. We'll file paperwork immediately securing your interest in it. Even if Trevor is arrested, the house is in both your names, so you have rights to it. And my job? I quit my position at the hospital to do this investigation. I need to make sure I can support myself when this is over. Nicole made notes on her legal pad. We'll include loss of income in your damage claims against Trevor. Additionally, I'd recommend you start thinking about your next steps professionally. With your qualifications and experience, you shouldn't have trouble finding work, but it might be wise to start putting out feelers now. They spent another hour going over details, preparing documents, and strategizing the legal approach. Naomi left the meeting feeling more confident about her future. She wasn't just destroying Trevor and Sienna. She was building something new for herself, something better than what she had before. That night, back in her room at the mansion, Naomi pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not notes about the investigation, but notes about her future. What did she want to do professionally? Where did she want to live? What kind of life did she want to build? The answers came more easily than she expected. She wanted to start her own consulting firm, helping hospitals and medical facilities improve their operations. She wanted to move out of the city, find a quieter place where she could breathe and think. She wanted to surround herself with people she could trust, people who valued honesty and integrity. She wanted to be her own person, defined by her own achievements rather than by her relationship to someone else. These weren't just dreams anymore. With Trevor's settlement money and her own skills, these were achievable goals. The betrayal that had destroyed her old life was actually giving her the opportunity to build a better one. Over the following weeks, Naomi divided her time between her investigation and planning her future. She continued documenting Trevor and Sienna's activities, but she also started networking with old colleagues from her hospital administration days, subtly letting people know she might be looking for new opportunities soon. She researched business loans and startup strategies for consulting firms. She looked at real estate in quieter towns outside the city. She also started therapy, finding a counselor who specialized in helping people recover from betrayal and rebuild their lives. The sessions were difficult but valuable, helping Naomi process her anger and grief in healthy ways rather than letting those emotions consume her. "What you're going through is profoundly painful," her therapist Dr. Williams said during one session. "But I'm impressed by how you're channeling that pain into productive action rather than self-destruction." "I don't have time for self-destruction," Naomi said. "I have too much work to do. Just make sure you're giving yourself space to feel your emotions too. Revenge and justice are important, but so is healing. Don't lose yourself in the quest to punish others." Naomi took that advice seriously. She made sure to take time for self-care, even while living in the mansion and maintaining her investigation. She went for early morning runs before her shift started. She read books that had nothing to do with financial fraud or legal proceedings. She video called her mother and old friends, maintaining connections to her real life outside the role she was playing. The balancing act was exhausting but necessary. Naomi couldn't let herself become consumed by anger and revenge, couldn't let Trevor and Sienna's betrayal define her entire existence. She had to remember that this was temporary, that she was working toward something better, that on the other side of this nightmare was a new life waiting for her. 6 weeks until the wedding. 6 weeks until everything she had worked for would come to fruition. 6 weeks until Trevor and Sienna would face the consequences of their crimes. Naomi was ready. She had the evidence. She had the plan. She had the determination and the strength to see it through. All that remained was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, when she stood before 300 guests and revealed the truth about the beautiful couple getting married, it would be glorious. Not because Naomi wanted to hurt them, though she wouldn't pretend she didn't feel satisfaction at the thought of their public humiliation, but because justice would finally be served. Because Harrison Blake would be saved from prison. Because Trevor and Sienna would be held accountable for their crimes. That was worth everything she had sacrificed to get here. That was worth the pain, the exhaustion, the months of living a double life. Justice was worth it all. The web of lies that Trevor and Sienna had carefully constructed was about to collapse on top of them. And Naomi would be the one to pull the thread that brought it all crashing down. The text came at 3 a.m, "Emergency. Kitchen. Now." Naomi woke instantly, her mind alert despite the early hour. She pulled on her robe over her pajamas and slipped out of her room, careful not to wake Geneva, who was snoring softly in the other bed. The mansion's hallways were dark and silent, illuminated only by small night lights placed at regular intervals along the baseboards. When she entered the staff kitchen, she found Bernard waiting with another person she hadn't expected to see, Harrison Blake's executive assistant, Carol Martinez. Carol was in her mid-40s, always impeccably dressed, and known for her fierce loyalty to Harrison. Naomi had never spoken to her beyond polite greetings in the hallway. "Nicole," Bernard said, using Naomi's fake name. "Or should I say Naomi? Carol knows who you really are." Naomi's heart rate spiked. This could be disaster or opportunity, depending on how Carol had learned her identity and what she planned to do with that information. Carol spoke before Naomi could decide whether to deny it. "I've been investigating Sienna Drake for 8 months. Harrison asked me to do a background check before he proposed, but I found some things that made me want to keep digging. When I learned you were working here under a fake identity, I did research on you too. I know who you really are and I know why you're here." "Are you going to expose me?" Naomi asked, keeping her voice steady. "No. I'm going to help you. Because what you're doing needs to be done. Harrison is making the biggest mistake of his life marrying that woman, and I haven't been able to figure out how to stop it without proof." "What have you found in your investigation?" Naomi asked. Carol pulled out her phone and showed Naomi a series of photographs and documents. Sienna Drake isn't even her real name. She was born Sandra Kovac in a small town in Ohio. She's been married 3 times before, all to wealthy men, and all those marriages ended in suspicious divorces where she walked away with substantial settlements. In 2 cases, the men ended up being investigated for financial crimes that emerged mysteriously during the divorce proceedings. Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. She's done this before. At least twice that I can confirm. Her pattern is to target wealthy, older men who are widowed or divorced. She positions herself as the perfect partner, someone who understands their world and their needs. She gets them to propose, then uses the engagement period to access their finances and gather information she can use against them. Then she marries them, triggers an investigation that freezes their assets, and divorces them while claiming victim status. By the time the investigations conclude and prove the men were actually innocent, she's already walked away with millions in protected assets. So Trevor is just her latest accomplice, Naomi said, pieces clicking together. She probably has a string of men helping her with different aspects of the con. Exactly. Your husband is just a tool she's using for his legal expertise. Once this job is done, she'll discard him too. She's probably already planning her next mark. Bernard poured coffee for all of them and they sat at the kitchen table discussing what they knew. Carol's investigation had uncovered Sienna's pattern of behavior, but she didn't have specific evidence of current crimes. Naomi had evidence of the crimes but hadn't realized. Sienna was a serial con artist. Together, their information painted a comprehensive picture of who they were dealing with. Harrison needs to see all of this, Carol said. But he's so deeply in love with her that he won't listen to warnings or suspicions. He'll think we're jealous or trying to interfere. We need proof that's so undeniable he can't rationalize it away. That's exactly what I'm working toward, Naomi said. I have recordings, financial documents, everything. I'm planning to reveal it all at the wedding. Carol nodded slowly. That's dramatic and effective. But there's a risk. If Sienna realizes she's been exposed, she might try to salvage something or deflect blame. We need to make sure the authorities are ready to act immediately, that there's no window for her to escape or destroy evidence. I've been working with an attorney to prepare the legal approach, Naomi said. But I haven't contacted law enforcement yet because I'm worried about the timing. If they investigate too early, Sienna and Trevor will know something's wrong. I have contacts at the FBI, Carol said. Agents who worked on financial crimes cases involving people in Harrison's circle. I can bring them into this, but we need to give them everything at once, a complete package that justifies immediate action. They spent the next 2 hours going through all the evidence both Naomi and Carol had gathered. Carol copied everything onto an encrypted drive, organizing it into clear categories. Proof of identity fraud, proof of embezzlement, proof of document forgery, proof of the affair, proof of conspiracy to frame Harrison for crimes he didn't commit. When they were finished, they had a prosecutable case that no defense attorney could easily dismiss. I'll reach out to my FBI contacts tomorrow, Carol said. I'll set up a meeting for next week where we can present everything. They'll need time to verify the evidence and prepare for arrests, but if we time it right, they can be ready to act on the wedding day. Won't they want to arrest them immediately once they see the evidence? Bernard asked. Not if I frame it right, Carol said. I'll explain that we want to catch them in the act, that waiting until the wedding gives us the best chance of a clean arrest with maximum evidence. Federal prosecutors love cases that are gift-wrapped like this. They'll play along if it means getting a conviction that's absolutely airtight. Naomi felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had been carrying this investigation alone for so long, even with Geneva and Bernard's help. Having Carol as an ally, someone with resources and connections and experience, made everything feel more real and more achievable. Why are you doing this? Naomi asked Carol. You could lose your job if this goes wrong. Harrison might be angry that you investigated his fiancée. Carol's expression was firm. I've worked for Harrison for 12 years. He's a good man who trusts people too easily. He's been hurt before by people who took advantage of his generosity. When he told me he was going to propose to Sienna, something felt wrong to me. The way she looked at him like he was a transaction instead of a person. I couldn't stand by and watch him make a mistake that would destroy him. He's lucky to have you. We're all lucky to have each other right now. This situation requires a team effort. Sienna is smart and experienced. She's successfully conned multiple men before. We need to be smarter and more prepared than she is. They agreed to meet regularly over the next weeks, coordinating their efforts and refining their plan. Carol would handle the FBI and make sure legal proceedings were prepared. Bernard would continue to provide security footage and access to the mansion's systems. Geneva would monitor Sienna's schedule and alert them to any changes in routine. And Naomi would continue to document everything, gathering any final pieces of evidence that might strengthen their case. Before they parted, Carol pulled Naomi aside. I want you to know that what you're doing is incredibly brave. A lot of people in your situation would have just walked away, gotten a quiet divorce and tried to move on. But you're fighting for justice not just for yourself but for Harrison too. That takes real strength. I'm not doing this just for justice, Naomi admitted. I'm doing it because I'm angry. Because Trevor destroyed our marriage for greed. Because he thinks I'm too weak to fight back. Anger can be a powerful motivator as long as you don't let it consume you. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself too. When this is over, you're going to need to heal and rebuild. Don't lose yourself in the revenge. Naomi thought about that conversation as she returned to her room in the pre-dawn darkness. Carol was right that she needed to think about the future beyond this confrontation. But it was hard to focus on anything else when she was so close to finally exposing Trevor and Sienna. The next weeks passed in a blur of careful planning and meticulous execution. Carol met with her FBI contacts and presented them with the evidence. The agents were impressed and agreed to coordinate with local law enforcement for arrests on the wedding day. They would wait until after the ceremony, until Trevor and Sienna were legally married, because certain fraud charges would be easier to prove once Sienna had official access to Harrison's accounts. Naomi continued her work as a maid, maintaining her cover while secretly preparing for the wedding day reveal. She worked with Bernard to get access to the audiovisual control room that would be used during the ceremony. She prepared a presentation file with the most damning recordings and documents, timed to play at the exact right moment. Geneva helped Naomi find a dress to wear for the wedding. As a staff member, Naomi would normally be working behind the scenes, but they had arranged for her to have a reason to be in the main ballroom during the ceremony. Geneva had volunteered to be sick that day, requiring Naomi to fill in as one of the servers during the reception. This would give Naomi access to the event and a legitimate reason to be present when everything was revealed. The dress was simple but elegant, appropriate for service staff but nice enough that Naomi wouldn't stand out as suspicious. Dark blue knee-length, professional. When Naomi tried it on, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She had lost weight during her months working at the mansion. Her face had hardened in ways that showed her experiences. Her eyes held a determination that hadn't been there before. "You look fierce," Geneva said approvingly. "Like someone who knows exactly what she's doing." "I hope so. Because if this plan falls apart, I'm going to lose everything." "It won't fall apart. We've prepared for everything. And even if something goes wrong, you have evidence that will convict them anyway. This plan just makes the reveal more dramatic." 3 weeks until the wedding. 3 weeks of final preparations, last-minute evidence gathering, and constant vigilance. Naomi felt like she was holding her breath, waiting for the moment when she could finally exhale. But she also felt stronger than she had in months, maybe stronger than she had ever been. She wasn't doing this alone anymore. She had allies who believed in her, who were helping her achieve justice, who understood what was at stake. Carol, Bernard, Geneva, Nicole the attorney, even the FBI agents who were preparing to make the arrests. They were all working together toward the same goal. Naomi thought about something her therapist had said. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. Healing means taking your power back, refusing to let the betrayal define your future. That was what this was really about. Not just revenge or justice, but taking back the power that Trevor had stolen from her. Proving to herself and to him that she was stronger than he ever gave her credit for. Building a future that didn't include him or depend on him or have anything to do with him. The wedding would be the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The end of Naomi as Trevor's deceived wife, and the beginning of Naomi as her own person, successful and independent and free. She couldn't wait for that new beginning. But first she had to finish what she started. First she had to make sure that Trevor and Sienna paid for what they had done. First she had to see the look on their faces when they realized that the pathetic, weak little wife they had mocked was the one who destroyed them completely. That moment was coming soon. And Naomi Patterson would be ready for it. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. Bright sunshine, clear blue skies, and a light breeze that made the mansion's gardens look like something from a movie. Naomi woke early, her stomach tight with nerves and anticipation. This was the day she had been working toward for months. This was the day everything would change. She showered and dressed in her server uniform, pulling her hair back into a sleek bun. She put on minimal makeup, wanting to look professional but not memorable. Today she would be invisible until the exact moment when she chose to be seen. The mansion was chaos in the best way. Wedding planners rushed through hallways with clipboards, florists arranged massive displays of white roses and orchids, caterers set up elaborate serving stations in the ballroom. Harrison Blake moved through it all looking happy but slightly overwhelmed, clearly not someone who enjoyed being the center of attention but willing to endure it for Sienna. Sienna herself was sequestered in a suite on the second floor, being attended to by a team of stylists, makeup artists and assistants. Naomi caught a glimpse of her through an open door, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something one of her bridesmaids said. She looked radiant and confident, like a woman who had everything she wanted within reach. Naomi felt a cold satisfaction knowing that in a few hours, that confidence would be shattered. Trevor arrived mid-morning, one of the groomsmen, even though he wasn't related to Harrison or particularly close to him. Sienna had insisted on it, claiming Trevor was such a loyal attorney and friend that he deserved a place of honor at the wedding. Harrison had agreed, oblivious as always to what was really happening. Naomi watched from the servants' hallway as Trevor entered the mansion, dressed in an expensive suit, joking with the other groomsmen. He looked happy, relaxed, like a man without a care in the world. Why wouldn't he be? In a few hours he would be one step closer to being a multimillionaire, one step closer to escaping his boring life and boring wife for something exciting and luxurious. He had no idea that his boring wife was 10 feet away, watching him through a crack in a door, counting down the minutes until his entire world collapsed. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m, to be held in the mansion's grand ballroom, which had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers, white silk draping, hundreds of candles, and enough flowers to stock a greenhouse. 300 guests sat in neat rows of white chairs, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Naomi worked with the catering staff, serving champagne to guests as they arrived. She kept her head down, smiled blandly, and listened to fragments of conversation. People talking about Harrison's wealth, about Sienna's beauty, about what a perfect couple they made. Several guests mentioned that this was Sienna's first marriage, that she was so lucky to have found such a wonderful man. If only they knew the truth. At 2:45, Carol found Naomi in the kitchen. The FBI agents are in position outside the estate. They'll wait for my signal after the reveal to enter and make the arrests. Are you ready? I'm ready. Naomi's hands were steady, her voice calm. She had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times. She would not mess it up now. The AV system is loaded with your files. When you're ready, just press the remote control in the booth. It will override whatever's playing on the screens and start your presentation. The doors to the ballroom will be locked from the outside to prevent anyone from leaving until the authorities arrive. Perfect. Naomi. Carol gripped her shoulder, her expression serious. After today, your life is going to change dramatically. Trevor will know you were behind this. You'll be named in all the legal proceedings. People will know your story. Are you sure you're ready for that level of exposure? I've thought about nothing else for months. I'm ready. I want people to know what he did. I want everyone to understand exactly what kind of man Trevor Patterson is. Carol nodded and left to take her position. Naomi finished her serving duties and then slipped away to the AV control booth, a small room tucked into a balcony overlooking the ballroom. Bernard was waiting there, monitoring the technical systems. Everything's set, he said. The remote is programmed. The files are queued. All you have to do is press this button when you're ready. Naomi took the remote control from him, feeling its weight in her hand. This small device held the power to destroy 2 people's lives. She felt no regret about that. They had earned this destruction through their own choices. At precisely 3 o'clock, music began to play and guests stood as Sienna made her entrance. She was stunning in a designer gown that probably cost more than a car, her auburn hair styled in an elaborate updo, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. She walked down the aisle alone, not given away by any family member because, as she had told everyone, her family was estranged and she preferred to come to Harrison as an independent woman. The truth, Naomi knew from Carol's research, was that Sienna's family had disowned her years ago after discovering her pattern of fraud and manipulation. Harrison stood at the altar looking genuinely moved, his eyes shining with emotion as Sienna approached. He really loved her, Naomi realized. Despite everything Sienna was planning to do to him, Harrison's feelings were genuine. That made this even sadder but also more necessary. Harrison deserved to know the truth about the woman he was marrying. The ceremony proceeded with standard vows and readings. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. Sienna said her vows with perfect sincerity, promising to love and honor Harrison all her days. Trevor stood among the groomsmen, watching with a small smile that made Naomi's blood boil. When the officiant said, "If anyone has any reason why these 2 should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace," there was the usual brief pause followed by polite laughter. No one ever actually objected at weddings. But Naomi didn't object either. She waited, letting the ceremony continue. She wanted them to complete their vows, wanted Harrison to say, "I do," wanted that legal marriage to be official. It would make the criminal charges stronger. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Harrison and Sienna kissed to applause and cheering. They turned to face the guests, smiling and holding hands, the picture of happiness. The large screens positioned around the ballroom displayed romantic photos of the couple, images that had been carefully curated to show their fairy tale romance. Then Naomi pressed the button. The screens went black for a second, then flickered to life with new content. Audio filled the ballroom, clear and unmistakable. It was Trevor's voice. Have you thought about what you're going to tell your wife? Poor little Naomi. How will she survive without her precious husband? I'll leave her a note. Something vague about needing to find myself. She'll cry for a few weeks and then move on. She's weak like that, always been too emotional. The ballroom went silent. Guests looked confused, turning to each other for explanation. Harrison's smile faded as he stared at the screens, not understanding what he was hearing. The audio continued, shifting to a different conversation. Did you transfer the money from the Chicago account? Done yesterday. 200,000 moved to the secondary offshore account in the Caymans. That brings our total to just over 4 million. We need at least 6 million before the wedding. Now the screens displayed bank statements showing the offshore accounts, the transferred funds, the dates that matched exactly with Harrison's business trips when Trevor had access to his accounts. Harrison's face went pale. He turned to look at Sienna, who had frozen in place, her bouquet dropping from her hands. Around the ballroom, guests began whispering, understanding dawning on their faces. The presentation continued relentlessly. More audio recordings of Trevor and Sienna discussing the embezzlement, the frame job, their plan to escape with millions. Security camera footage showing Trevor entering the mansion on the night of Harrison and Sienna's engagement, kissing Sienna while she showed off her ring. Photographs of forged documents that would have sent Harrison to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Trevor spotted the AV booth and started pushing through groomsmen toward the stairs. But Bernard had locked the booth door from the inside. By the time Trevor reached it, Naomi had already shown enough evidence to condemn them both completely. The final image on the screens was a split screen, Sienna's real identity documents showing she was Sandra Kovac, and a timeline of her previous marriages and frauds. Below that, a single line of text. The FBI is outside, ready to arrest Trevor Patterson and Sandra Kovac for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and identity fraud. Naomi finally stepped out of the booth and stood at the balcony railing where everyone could see her. She looked directly at Trevor, saw the shock and rage on his face as he recognized his wife in her server uniform. "Surprise, darling," she said, her voice carrying in the silent ballroom. "Did you think I was too weak to fight back?" The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests were shouting, cameras were flashing as people recorded everything on their phones, security was rushing toward Sienna and Trevor. Harrison stood frozen at the altar, staring at his new wife with an expression of betrayed devastation. Sienna tried to run, hiking up her expensive gown and heading for the side exit. But Carol was there, blocking her path, with FBI agents filing in behind her. Trevor tried to bluster his way out, demanding to know who authorized this breach of privacy, insisting there must be some explanation. But his voice faltered as agents approached him with handcuffs. "Trevor Patterson, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft," one agent said, reciting his rights as they cuffed him in his wedding tuxedo. Across the ballroom, other agents were doing the same to Sienna. Naomi watched it all from her balcony vantage point, feeling strangely calm. This was the moment she had been working toward for months. Seeing Trevor in handcuffs, seeing Sienna's perfect facade shatter, seeing Harrison finally understand who he had almost given his life to. It felt like justice and vindication and closure all at once. Trevor looked up at her, his expression twisted with rage and disbelief. "You did this?" "I did this," Naomi confirmed. "Every single piece of evidence. I documented everything, every lie, every theft, every moment you thought I was too stupid to notice. Congratulations on your wedding, Trevor. I hope prison is everything you deserve." He started to say something else, but the agents were leading him away, along with Sienna, who was screaming about her rights and demanding her lawyer. The wedding guests parted to let them through, everyone recording on their phones, everyone already posting to social media about what they had just witnessed. Harrison stood alone at the altar, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Carol went to him, speaking quietly, trying to offer comfort. He looked up at the screens, which were now showing a frozen image of bank statements, proof of what had almost been done to him. Naomi descended from the booth, no longer needing to hide. Geneva met her at the bottom of the stairs, pulling her into a hug. "You did it? You actually did it. We did it, Naomi corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you and Bernard and Carol. Bernard appeared looking satisfied. The FBI asked me to make sure the security footage is preserved. They want everything from the past 6 months. They'll get it, Naomi said. Every frame. The ballroom was slowly clearing as guests were asked to leave by law enforcement. Several reporters had somehow gotten word of what happened and were waiting outside, cameras ready. This would be news, Naomi realized. The billionaire's wedding that ended in arrests, the con artist who was finally caught, the loyal wife who brought down her cheating husband. By tomorrow their story would be everywhere. Naomi found herself standing alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the abandoned decorations of what was supposed to be a fairy tale wedding. White roses and crystal and candles, all of it hollow and meaningless now. She thought about her own wedding 7 years ago, about how happy she had been, how naive. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew that love without trust was worthless. Harrison approached her slowly, his face devastated but grateful. You're Naomi Patterson. Trevor's wife. Ex-wife soon, Naomi said. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. You could have just exposed your husband and left me to my fate. Why did you help me too? Because you're a good man who didn't deserve what they were planning to do to you. Because I couldn't stand by and watch them destroy an innocent person just for money. Because sometimes doing the right thing is more important than just taking care of yourself. Harrison nodded slowly. If there's anything I can do to repay you, anything at all, please tell me. There is one thing. I'm planning to start a consulting firm, helping medical facilities improve their operations. I have the expertise, but I'll need capital to get started. If you'd be willing to invest, I'd appreciate it. Not as charity, but as a genuine business opportunity. Send me your business plan. I'll review it personally. If it's sound, you'll have your investment. Harrison extended his hand and Naomi shook it. Thank you, Naomi. For everything. After Harrison left with Carol to start dealing with the legal and financial aftermath of the day's revelations, Naomi stood alone in the ruined wedding venue. She should have felt triumph, satisfaction, victory. And she did feel those things. But she also felt something else, closure. The chapter of her life that included Trevor was finally, definitively over. What came next would be entirely up to her. Her phone rang. It was Nicole, her attorney. I'm seeing videos of the wedding online. I take it things went according to plan? Better than planned, Naomi said. They're both under arrest. The evidence was presented publicly. By tomorrow everyone will know the truth. Then we need to move fast. I'm filing your divorce papers first thing in the morning. I'm also filing a civil suit against Trevor for emotional distress and fraud. With him facing criminal charges, we'll have leverage to get a favorable settlement. Do it. I want this finished as quickly as possible. After the call ended, Naomi took one last look around the ballroom. Then she walked out, leaving behind the expensive flowers and designer decorations and shattered dreams. She had work to do, a future to build, a life to live. She didn't have time to waste on what might have been. Outside, reporters tried to intercept her, but Bernard and Geneva created a barrier, hustling Naomi to a waiting car. As they drove away from the mansion, Naomi looked back one final time at the place where she had spent months working undercover, gathering evidence and preparing her revenge. She wouldn't miss it. That chapter was over. Tomorrow she would start writing the next one. The headlines started appearing within hours of the wedding day arrests. Billionaire's wedding ends in FBI raid. Attorney and con artist arrested for multimillion-dollar fraud scheme. Loyal wife exposes husband's criminal conspiracy. By the next morning, Naomi's story was trending on social media, with videos of the confrontation viewed millions of times. Naomi watched the news coverage from a hotel room she had rented for the week, not wanting to return to the house she had shared with Trevor while legal proceedings were ongoing. The reporters had found photos of her from before, pictures from her wedding to Trevor, images from her professional life at the hospital. They were calling her brave, smart, and ruthless. Some people praised her strategy and determination. Others criticized her for the public nature of the exposure, calling it vindictive and cruel. Naomi didn't care about the opinions. She knew what she had done and why. Public exposure was necessary to prevent Trevor from using his legal skills to minimize consequences, to make sure that everyone understood the scope of his crimes. If she had gone to the authorities quietly, he might have negotiated a plea deal, might have served minimal time, might have emerged from prison with his reputation partially intact. This way, everyone knew exactly who Trevor Patterson was. The criminal proceedings moved quickly. Trevor and Sienna were both denied bail due to flight risk, given that they had demonstrated clear intent to leave the country and had access to offshore accounts. They were held in separate facilities pending trial, which Nicole said could take months to schedule given the complexity of the financial crimes involved. Naomi's divorce filing made news too. She was suing Trevor for full ownership of their marital home, for all marital assets, and for additional damages based on his fraud and emotional distress he had caused. With Trevor facing decades in prison and his assets frozen pending the criminal case, the divorce court was sympathetic to Naomi's position. "The judge is going to rule in your favor on virtually everything," Nicole told her during a meeting at her office. "Trevor's attorney is trying to argue that you're not entitled to punitive damages because you weren't directly involved in the embezzlement scheme. But we're countering that Trevor's crimes were enabled by the stability and respectability of his marriage to you, that you provided cover for his criminal activity without knowledge, and that you're entitled to compensation for that exploitation." "What about the house?" Naomi asked. "It's yours. Trevor has no way to contest it given his circumstances. We're also getting you alimony payments from his frozen assets, approved by the court as legitimate claims against his estate. You won't get rich from this, but you'll have enough to start your life over comfortably." Naomi had already started thinking about that new life. She had reached out to contacts in the healthcare industry, letting them know she was available for consulting work. Several hospitals and medical facilities had expressed interest in hiring her to help them improve operations and efficiency. She had also started drafting a business plan for her own consulting firm, the one she would ask Harrison to invest in once the dust settled from his disaster wedding. But first she needed to deal with the emotional aftermath of everything that had happened. The adrenaline that had carried her through the investigation and the confrontation had faded, leaving her exhausted and processing complicated feelings about Trevor, her marriage, and her future. She met with Dr. Williams, her therapist, twice a week during this period. In one session she broke down completely, crying for the first time since the wedding day reveal. Not crying for Trevor or for her lost marriage, but crying from the release of stress and fear and pressure she had been carrying for months. "I did it," she said between sobs. "I actually did it. I brought him down." "You did," Dr. Williams said gently. "And now you need to let yourself process what that means. You've been in survival mode for so long, focused on the investigation and the plan. Now that it's over, your mind and body need to process the trauma of betrayal. I thought I would feel more satisfaction. I thought I would be happy seeing Trevor arrested. Satisfaction and happiness are different things. You got justice, which is satisfying on an intellectual level. But justice doesn't erase the pain of betrayal. It doesn't undo the fact that someone you loved and trusted hurt you deeply. You're allowed to grieve that even while feeling satisfied with the outcome." Naomi worked through those complicated emotions over the following weeks. She allowed herself to be angry at Trevor for destroying their marriage. She allowed herself to feel sad about the years she had invested in a relationship that turned out to be built on lies. She allowed herself to question her own judgment, to wonder how she had missed the signs of his true character. But she also allowed herself to feel proud of what she had accomplished. She had conducted a complex investigation successfully. She had saved Harrison Blake from prison and financial ruin. She had brought 2 criminals to justice. She had protected herself financially and emotionally by taking control of the situation rather than being a passive victim. The story continued to evolve as more details emerged. Journalists discovered Sienna's real history, her previous fraudulent marriages, her pattern of targeting and destroying wealthy men. They found Trevor's colleagues at his law firm who had noticed his suspicious behavior but had dismissed it as stress from his heavy workload. They interviewed staff members from the Blake mansion who described Sienna's cruelty and Trevor's arrogance. Public opinion turned heavily against both of them. Trevor's law license was permanently suspended pending the outcome of his criminal trial. Sienna's previous victims came forward with their own stories, leading to additional charges in other jurisdictions. It became clear that both of them would spend significant time in prison once their cases were resolved. 6 weeks after the wedding day arrests, the preliminary hearings began. Naomi was required to testify about how she had gathered evidence, about what she had observed, about the recordings and documents she had collected. Trevor's attorney tried to argue that Naomi's evidence was inadmissible because she had been working undercover without proper legal authority. But the judge ruled that as Trevor's legal wife, Naomi had the right to investigate her husband's activities, and that the evidence she gathered was admissible as long as it was obtained from places she had legal access to. Sienna's attorney tried a different approach, arguing that Sienna had been coerced by Trevor into participating in the scheme, that she was really a victim of his manipulation. But Carol's evidence of Sienna's previous frauds destroyed that defense. The prosecutor painted a clear picture of Sienna as a calculated predator who had refined her scheme over multiple iterations. The preliminary hearings confirmed that both cases would go to trial. Trevor's trial was scheduled for 6 months away. Sienna's for 8 months. Both of them remained in custody, denied bail, their offshore accounts frozen and subject to seizure for restitution to Harrison and other victims. Naomi attended some of the hearings but not all of them. She needed to move forward with her life, not remain trapped in the past reliving Trevor's betrayal. She finalized her divorce, signed the papers that officially ended her marriage and took back her maiden name. She was no longer Naomi Patterson. She was Naomi Williams again, the person she had been before Trevor, reclaiming her identity. She also met with Harrison to discuss the business investment he had offered. She had prepared a comprehensive business plan for Williams Healthcare Consulting, outlining the services she would provide, her target market, her pricing structure, and her projected growth over 5 years. Harrison reviewed it carefully, asking intelligent questions about her experience and her vision for the company. "This is a sound plan," he said finally. "You clearly know what you're doing. I'll invest $250,000 for a 20% stake in the company. Does that work for you?" "That's more than generous," Naomi said, surprised. "I was only expecting $50,000. You saved me from prison and financial ruin. The least I can do is help you start a business that will be successful on its own merits. Take the money, build something great, and prove to everyone that you're more than just the woman who exposed her cheating husband." Naomi accepted his offer and immediately began setting up her company. She rented a small office space, hired an assistant, and started marketing her services to healthcare facilities in the region. Her first client was a struggling rural hospital that needed help reorganizing their administrative processes. Naomi threw herself into the work, using her skills and experience to create efficient systems that saved the hospital money and improved patient care. Word spread quickly about her effectiveness. Within 3 months, she had 5 clients. Within 6 months, she had to hire 2 additional consultants to handle the workload. Williams Healthcare Consulting was becoming exactly what she had envisioned, a successful firm that made a real difference in how healthcare was delivered. Naomi also moved out of the city, buying a small house in a quiet town an hour away from where she had lived with Trevor. The house was nothing fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom cottage with a garden and a view of the mountains. But it was entirely hers, purchased with money she had earned through her work, decorated according to her own taste without having to consider anyone else's preferences. She planted flowers in the garden, things that bloomed in different seasons so there would always be color outside her window. She set up a home office where she could work when she wasn't traveling to client sites. She bought new furniture that didn't carry any memories of Trevor or their shared life. She created a space that felt like home in a way the house she had shared with Trevor never really had. Her mother came to visit, bringing Naomi's younger sister. They spent a weekend helping Naomi settle into her new house, painting walls and arranging furniture and cooking meals together. It was the first time in months that Naomi felt truly relaxed, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally and were proud of what she had accomplished. "I was so angry at Trevor when I found out what he did," her mother said as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset. "I wanted to drive to that prison and give him a piece of my mind. But seeing you now, seeing how strong you are and how you've built this new life, I realized that he didn't destroy you. He just forced you to discover how powerful you already were." "I wish I hadn't needed that particular lesson," Naomi said. "But you're right. I'm stronger now than I've ever been. And I built that strength myself." The legal proceedings continued in the background of Naomi's new life. Trevor's trial finally began 8 months after his arrest. Naomi attended the opening arguments and the closing arguments but didn't follow every day of the trial. She had moved on, and sitting in a courtroom watching Trevor attempt to defend his indefensible actions felt like a waste of time. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Trevor to 12 years in federal prison without possibility of early parole. He would also be required to pay full restitution to Harrison Blake and other victims, meaning any assets he had would be seized and distributed. His law career was over, his reputation destroyed, his freedom taken away for the prime years of his life. Naomi felt satisfaction when she heard the verdict but not happiness. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase what had been done to her. It didn't give her back the 7 years she had invested in a marriage built on lies. It simply confirmed that actions had consequences and that even clever people who thought they were untouchable could be held accountable. Sienna's trial followed 2 months later with similar results. Guilty on all counts, 15 years in federal prison, required to pay restitution to all her victims across multiple states. Her real identity was permanently tied to her crimes now. Sandra Kovac would never be able to reinvent herself and target another victim. When both trials were concluded, Naomi threw a small party at her new house. She invited Geneva, Bernard, Carol, Nicole, Dr. Williams, and a few friends from her pre-Trevor life. They ate good food, drank wine, and celebrated not just Trevor's downfall but Naomi's rebirth. To Naomi, Carol said, raising her glass in a toast, who showed us all what real strength looks like. May your future be as bright as your past was painful. They all drank to that, and Naomi felt tears in her eyes. But these were good tears, tears of gratitude and relief and hope. She had survived the worst betrayal she could imagine. She had fought back and won. And now she was building something new, something better, something entirely her own. The aftermath of Trevor's betrayal had been long and difficult. But standing in her house surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her, looking out at the mountains through her window, thinking about the business she had built and the clients she was helping, Naomi realized something important. Trevor's betrayal had destroyed their marriage, but it hadn't destroyed her. If anything, it had forced her to become stronger, more independent, more confident in her own abilities. She would never thank Trevor for what he did. But she could acknowledge that his betrayal had led her to discover parts of herself she never knew existed. And those parts were powerful, capable, and unstoppable. The aftermath was over. The future was beginning. And Naomi was ready for whatever came next. 1 year after the disastrous wedding that had made headlines across the country, Naomi stood on a stage at a healthcare administration conference in downtown Chicago. She was delivering a keynote speech about implementing efficient systems in struggling medical facilities, sharing insights from her rapidly growing consulting firm. The audience of several hundred hospital administrators and healthcare executives listened intently as Naomi presented her approach to improving patient care while reducing costs. She showed case studies from her clients, demonstrating measurable improvements in efficiency and patient satisfaction. She spoke confidently about change management, about overcoming resistance from entrenched staff members, about the importance of data-driven decision-making. This was her fourth speaking engagement in the past 6 months. Her reputation in the healthcare industry was growing not because of her connection to Trevor's scandal, but because of the genuine value she provided to her clients. Williams Healthcare Consulting now had 12 full-time employees and contracts with over 30 medical facilities across 4 states. After her presentation, Naomi fielded questions from the audience. One woman asked about her background, and Naomi gave her standard professional biography without mentioning Trevor or the wedding day confrontation. She had decided early on that she would not trade on that story, would not use her brief celebrity to promote her business. She wanted Williams Healthcare Consulting to succeed because of her skills and her work, not because people recognized her name from news articles. Still, some people knew who she was. After the session ended and Naomi was gathering her materials, a man approached her cautiously. He was in his 50s, well-dressed, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "Ms. Williams? I'm Dr. Julian Foster. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Lakeside Memorial Hospital. I was impressed by your presentation, and I'd like to discuss potentially hiring your firm to help us reorganize our emergency department." "I'd be happy to discuss that," Naomi said, handing him her business card. "Send me an email and we can set up a consultation call. I also wanted to say, though this might be inappropriate, that I admire your courage in what you went through last year. I followed the story in the news. What you did required tremendous strength." Naomi had received similar comments from people occasionally, usually well-meaning but sometimes intrusive. She had learned to accept them graciously without dwelling on the past. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say. But I'm much more interested in talking about the future than the past." Julian smiled. "I respect that. I'll email you this week about the consultation." He left and Naomi finished packing up. Geneva, who had left her job at the Blake Mansion to become Naomi's executive assistant, helped her carry materials to their rental car. "That Dr. Foster seemed nice," Geneva said with a knowing look. "And single, unless I'm misreading the lack of a wedding ring." "Geneva, I'm not interested in dating right now. I'm focused on building the business." "You've been saying that for a year. At some point you need to let yourself think about personal happiness too." "I'm happy. I have a successful business, good friends, a house I love. I don't need a man to complete my life." "No one said you need a man. But wanting companionship doesn't make you weak or mean you're not independent. It just means you're human." Naomi didn't respond, but but Geneva's words stayed with her during the flight back home. Was she avoiding relationships because she was focused on her career, or because she was afraid of being betrayed again? Had Trevor's actions made her close herself off from the possibility of future love? These were questions she explored in her next therapy session with Dr. Williams. "I think part of me is afraid," Naomi admitted. "I trusted Trevor completely and look what happened. How do I trust anyone again?" You rebuild trust slowly with people who earn it through consistent actions over time. What Trevor did was a profound betrayal, but that doesn't mean every person you meet will betray you. You can't let one bad experience prevent you from having meaningful connections in the future. I don't want to be defined by what Trevor did to me. I don't want to be the woman who was betrayed and can't move past it. Then don't be that woman. Be the woman who was betrayed, who fought back, who rebuilt her life, and who is now strong enough to open herself to new possibilities. Your story doesn't end with Trevor's crimes. It continues with whatever you choose to do next. Naomi thought about that conversation over the following weeks. She had been so focused on professional success that she hadn't given much thought to her personal life. She had friends, she had her family, but she was still somewhat isolated, still protecting herself from vulnerability. She decided to make small changes. She accepted invitations to social events that she previously would have declined. She joined a book club in her new town, meeting once a month to discuss novels and drink wine with other women. She started going to a yoga class on Saturday mornings, enjoying the physical challenge and the meditative aspect of the practice. She also followed up with Dr. Julian Foster about the consulting contract for Lakeside Memorial Hospital. During their initial consultation call, he was professional and knowledgeable, asking good questions about her approach and her availability. They scheduled an on-site visit for her to assess the emergency department's needs. When Naomi arrived at Lakeside Memorial, Julian gave her a tour of the facility. It was a mid-size hospital in a suburban area, clean and well-maintained but clearly struggling with some operational inefficiencies. The emergency department was overcrowded, with patients waiting hours to be seen and staff looking stressed and overwhelmed. Naomi spent 3 days observing operations, interviewing staff members, reviewing protocols and procedures. She identified several key issues: poor triage systems, inadequate communication between departments, and scheduling problems that left certain shifts dangerously understaffed. These were all fixable problems, the kind of work she excelled at. She presented her findings to Julian and the hospital's executive team, along with a proposal for how her firm could help implement solutions. The executives were impressed and approved the contract immediately. Over the next 3 months, Naomi and her team worked closely with Lakeside Memorial to reorganize their emergency department. They redesigned the triage system, implemented new communication protocols, created better staff scheduling, and trained nurses and doctors on the new procedures. The results were dramatic. Patient wait times decreased by 40%, staff satisfaction improved significantly, and the department's efficiency metrics rose across the board. During this project, Naomi worked directly with Julian on several occasions. She found him to be intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely committed to improving patient care. Unlike many administrators who focus primarily on costs and metrics, Julian seemed to truly care about the people being served by the hospital. One evening after a particularly long day of training sessions, Julian invited Naomi to join him for dinner to discuss the project's progress. Naomi almost declined, her instinct to maintain professional distance. But something made her say yes instead. They went to a quiet restaurant near the hospital, nothing fancy but comfortable and warm. They talked about the project at first, reviewing what had gone well and what challenges remained. But gradually the conversation shifted to more personal topics. "How did you get into healthcare administration?" Julian asked. "I've always been interested in systems and efficiency. Healthcare seemed like a field where those skills could make a real difference in people's lives. I like knowing that the work I do actually helps patients, even if I'm not directly providing care." That's a good answer. A lot of administrators are just focused on the business side, treating hospitals like any other corporation. But healthcare is different. We're dealing with people at their most vulnerable. They talked about their educational backgrounds, their career paths, their philosophies about healthcare delivery. Naomi found herself relaxing, enjoying the conversation in a way she hadn't enjoyed talking with someone in a long time. Julian was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and really listening to her answers. "Can I ask you something personal?" Julian said eventually. "And please tell me if this is too forward or inappropriate given our professional relationship." Naomi tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. I know about what happened with your ex-husband. I looked you up after the conference and obviously your story was big news last year. I'm not asking about the details or anything like that. I just want to know if you're okay, if you found peace with everything." It was a surprisingly kind question, focused on her well-being rather than salacious details about the scandal. Naomi appreciated that. "I'm okay," she said honestly. "It was the hardest thing I've ever been through, but I survived it. And in some ways I'm better now than I was before. I know myself better. I trust my instincts more. I don't take things for granted." That's a healthy perspective. A lot of people who go through betrayal like that become bitter or closed off. You seem to have done the opposite. "I won't pretend it's been easy. I still have moments where I question my judgment or wonder how I missed the signs. But mostly I'm focused on the future, on building something good out of what was meant to destroy me." Julian nodded, his expression understanding. "I went through a difficult divorce about 5 years ago. Not anything as dramatic as what you experienced, but it was painful. My ex-wife and I just grew apart, wanted different things. It took me a long time to be okay being single again, to not feel like I had failed somehow." "Do you feel okay now?" "Most of the time, yes. I've rebuilt my life around work and my kids. They're teenagers now, living with their mother but visiting me regularly. I have good relationships with them and I'm proud of that. But I won't pretend I don't get lonely sometimes." They talked for another hour, sharing stories about their lives, finding common ground in their experiences. When the evening ended, Julian walked Naomi to her car. "I enjoyed this," he said. "Not just the professional conversation but the personal part too. Would it be completely inappropriate for me to ask if I could take you to dinner again sometime? Not about work, just as two people getting to know each other?" Naomi's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself, to maintain boundaries. But she thought about Dr. Williams's words about opening herself to new possibilities. She thought about how comfortable she had felt talking with Julian, how he had been respectful and kind without any ulterior motives. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "But let's wait until the Lakeside project is finished. I don't want to complicate our professional relationship." Julian smiled. "That's fair. The project should be wrapped up in about 6 weeks. I'll ask you again then." 6 weeks later, when Williams Healthcare Consulting's work at Lakeside Memorial was successfully completed, Julian did ask again. Naomi said yes. They went to dinner, then to a movie, then on a hike through a nearby state park. They took things slowly, both of them cautious from their past experiences but willing to try. Julian was different from Trevor in fundamental ways. He was genuine where Trevor had been calculating. He was kind where Trevor had been selfish. He treated Naomi with respect and appreciation, never taking her for granted, always interested in her thoughts and opinions. They dated for several months before Naomi felt comfortable introducing him to her friends and family. Geneva loved him immediately. "He looks at you like you're the most interesting person in the room," Geneva said approvingly. "That's how it should be." Naomi's mother was more cautious, protective after what had happened with Trevor. But Julian won her over by asking thoughtful questions about Naomi's childhood, by genuinely wanting to understand where Naomi came from and what had shaped her. The relationship progressed naturally and comfortably. There were no dramatic declarations or rushed commitments. They both understood that trust had to be earned through consistent actions over time. But gradually, Naomi found herself opening up to Julian in ways she hadn't opened up to anyone since Trevor's betrayal. She told him about the investigation she had conducted, about working undercover as a maid, about the wedding day confrontation. Julian listened without judgment, understanding that this was a significant part of Naomi's story even though it was painful to discuss. "What you did required incredible courage and intelligence," Julian said. "But I hope you know that's not why I'm interested in you. I'm interested because of who you are now, because of the business you've built, because of the way you approach challenges. The past is part of your story, but it's not the whole story." That was exactly what Naomi needed to hear. She was more than the woman who exposed her cheating husband. She was a successful businesswoman, a skilled consultant, a good friend, a caring daughter and sister. She was someone with her own dreams and ambitions and personality. Trevor's betrayal was part of her history, but it didn't define her entire existence. Williams Healthcare Consulting continued to grow throughout Naomi's second year of business. She opened a second office in a neighboring state, hired more consultants, and landed contracts with some of the region's largest hospital systems. Industry publications wrote articles about her innovative approaches to healthcare administration. She was invited to serve on panels and boards, recognized as an expert in her field. The business success was gratifying, but what mattered more to Naomi was the impact she was making. Every hospital she helped became more efficient, which meant doctors and nurses could focus more on patient care. Every system she improved meant patients received better service. The work she did made a real difference in people's lives, and that was more satisfying than any amount of money or recognition. 2 years after the wedding day confrontation, Naomi received an unexpected letter. It was from Trevor, mailed from the federal prison where he was serving his sentence. She stared at the envelope for a long time before deciding to open it. The letter was surprisingly short and, to Naomi's shock, genuinely apologetic. Trevor wrote that he had spent his time in prison reflecting on his actions, that he understood the magnitude of what he had done to her and to Harrison. He didn't make excuses or try to justify himself. He simply said he was sorry for the pain he had caused and that he hoped someday Naomi could forgive him. Naomi read the letter 3 times, trying to determine if it was sincere or just another manipulation. She couldn't tell for certain, and ultimately she decided it didn't matter. Whether Trevor was genuinely sorry or not, forgiveness was something she would do for herself, not for him. Forgiveness meant letting go of anger, not reconciling with the person who hurt her. She wrote a brief response: "I forgive you for what you did, not because you deserve it but because I deserve peace. I hope you use your time in prison to become a better person. But understand that forgiveness doesn't mean I want any contact with you. This will be my only response to any letter you send. Move on with your life, whatever that looks like from prison, and let me move on with mine." After sending the letter, Naomi felt lighter, like she had set down a weight she didn't realize she was still carrying. Trevor's crimes and betrayal would always be part of her history, but they no longer had power over her present or future. She had taken back her life, built something better than what he destroyed, and found happiness on her own terms. That evening she had dinner with Julian at her house. They cooked together, something they had started doing regularly, enjoying the comfortable domesticity of preparing a meal as a team. After dinner they sat on her back porch watching the sunset over the mountains. "I got a letter from Trevor today," Naomi said. "An apology letter from prison." Julian didn't react with shock or jealousy, just quiet interest. "How do you feel about that?" "Surprisingly okay. I wrote back telling him I forgive him but don't want further contact. And I meant it. I forgive him because holding on to that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him." "That's mature of you. A lot of people couldn't do that." "I don't know if it's maturity or just exhaustion. I'm tired of letting Trevor occupy space in my mind. I want to focus on what's ahead, not what's behind." Julian reached over and took her hand. "Then let's focus on what's ahead. Your business is growing. You're helping people. You seem happy. Those are the things that matter." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors as the sun dipped below the mountains. Naomi thought about how different her life was now compared to 2 years ago. She had lost a marriage but gained herself. She had been betrayed but had fought back and won. She had been broken but had rebuilt herself stronger than before. The woman Trevor had called weak and pathetic had proven him spectacularly wrong. She had not only survived his betrayal but had thrived despite it. And she would continue to thrive, building a life full of purpose, success, and genuine happiness. Rising from the ashes of her old life, Naomi had become someone new. Someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't settle for anything less than she deserved. And that person was pretty magnificent. 3 years after the wedding that made headlines, Naomi stood in the lobby of the new headquarters of Williams Healthcare Consulting. The building wasn't huge, just a modest 3-story structure in a suburban office park, but it was entirely hers. The company now employed 42 people across offices in 5 states, with contracts serving over 100 medical facilities. What had started as one woman's determination to rebuild her life had become a thriving business that made a real difference in healthcare delivery. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was attended by clients, employees, friends, and family. Harrison Blake was there, having remained a friend and mentor to Naomi even after his investment had been paid back multiple times over. Carol Martinez stood beside him, having left her position as his executive assistant to become the chief operating officer of his revitalized business empire. Geneva was there too, now Naomi's director of operations, wearing a dress that cost more than her entire year's salary from her maid days at the Blake mansion. Naomi's mother and sister were in the front row, beaming with pride. Her mother had tears in her eyes as Naomi gave a speech about the company's growth and vision for the future. Janelle was there with her family, the friend who had stood by Naomi through everything and who had helped create the fake identity that made the investigation possible. And Julian was there, standing off to the side but watching Naomi with obvious pride and affection. They had been together for 2 years now, taking their relationship slow but steady, building something real and lasting. He had proposed 3 months earlier, and Naomi had said yes, though they weren't planning to marry for at least another year. This time, Naomi wanted to be absolutely certain, wanted to build a foundation of trust so strong that nothing could shake it. After the ribbon cutting, Naomi gave tours of the new office space. Her own office was on the 3rd floor with large windows overlooking the mountains in the distance. The walls were decorated with framed articles about successful projects her firm had completed, photos of her team members, and certificates recognizing her contributions to healthcare administration. There was also, in a small corner that visitors wouldn't notice unless they looked carefully, a single photograph from the day of Trevor and Sienna's wedding. Not from the ceremony itself, but from a security camera angle showing Naomi in her server uniform, standing at the edge of the ballroom watching the chaos unfold. She kept the photo as a reminder not of revenge but of her own strength, of the moment when she had stood up for herself and refused to be a victim. The celebration continued into the evening with a dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. Naomi sat surrounded by people she loved and trusted, people who had supported her journey from devastated wife to successful businesswoman. She looked around the table and felt overwhelming gratitude for how her life had turned out. Harrison raised his glass for a toast. To Naomi Williams, who taught us all that adversity can be the catalyst for extraordinary achievement. You didn't let betrayal destroy you. You used it to discover your own power. That's the mark of true strength. Everyone drank to that, and Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. 3 years ago, she had been hiding in a storage closet watching her husband kiss another woman, feeling like her life was over. Now she was here, celebrated and successful and surrounded by love. The journey between those 2 moments had been difficult, but it had been worth every painful step. Late that night, after the celebrations had ended, Naomi and Julian returned to the house she still loved, the simple cottage she had bought with her settlement money. They sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Are you happy?" Julian asked, a question he had asked her many times over their 2 years together. "Yes," Naomi said, and she meant it completely. "I'm happy with my business, with my life, with us. I'm happy with who I've become." "You should be. You've accomplished incredible things. I keep thinking about something my therapist told me years ago. She said that healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It means taking your power back, refusing to let the betrayal define your future. Have you done that? Taken your power back?" "I have. Trevor tried to destroy me, but instead he freed me. He forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I had. He pushed me to build a life that's better than anything I had before. I don't thank him for that, but I can acknowledge that the person I've become is someone I'm proud to be." Julian squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you too. And I love you not despite what you've been through but including it. Your past is part of what makes you who you are. I love you too. And I'm glad I didn't let fear of betrayal keep me from opening my heart again. You've shown me that not all men are like Trevor, that trust can be rebuilt, that love can be real and honest and healthy." They sat in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about the future they were building together. Naomi thought about the wedding they would have someday, a small intimate ceremony that celebrated genuine love instead of the fake spectacle that Trevor and Sienna had planned. She thought about possibly having children with Julian, something she had given up on after her marriage to Trevor fell apart but now seemed possible again. But mostly she thought about the business she had built, the people she employed, the patients whose lives were better because of the work her firm did. That was her legacy, not the dramatic story of how she exposed her cheating husband but the quieter, more meaningful story of how she turned betrayal into motivation to help others. The next morning, Naomi went into her new office early, wanting some quiet time to settle into the space before the workday began. She sat at her desk and looked out at the view, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the woman she used to be, the hospital administrator with the seemingly perfect marriage who thought she had her life figured out. That woman had been naive but not foolish, trusting but not stupid. She deserved better than what Trevor gave her, and Naomi hoped that woman would be proud of who she had become. She thought about the dark months of the investigation, living as a maid in the Blake mansion, gathering evidence while watching her husband betray her over and over. Those months had been necessary but brutal, forcing her to develop patience and strategy and ruthlessness she didn't know she possessed. She thought about the wedding day confrontation, the moment when she finally exposed everything and watched Trevor and Sienna's perfect plan collapse. That moment had been satisfying but also sad, a clear end to one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. And she thought about the years since then, rebuilding her life piece by piece, learning to trust again, creating something successful and meaningful. Those years had been about more than just revenge or recovery. They had been about discovering who Naomi Williams truly was when she wasn't defined by being someone's wife or victim. Her phone buzzed with a text from Geneva. "Boss lady, you ready for the big first day in our new building? The team is excited." Naomi smiled and texted back, "Ready for anything. Let's make this the best year yet." Because that was who she was now. Someone ready for anything. Someone who didn't run from challenges but faced them head on. Someone who turned obstacles into opportunities and setbacks into comebacks. Someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. Trevor had thought she was weak, emotional, easy to deceive. Sienna had thought she was just another invisible servant, beneath notice or concern. They had both drastically underestimated her, and that underestimation had been their downfall. Naomi pulled up her calendar for the day, looking at meetings with clients, strategy sessions with her team, planning calls for new projects. Her life was full and busy and meaningful. She was helping people, building something lasting, making a difference in the world. And she was doing it all on her own terms, independent and strong and free. The door to her office opened and Julian appeared, holding 2 cups of coffee from their favorite cafe. "Thought you might want some caffeine before your day starts." "You're wonderful," Naomi said, accepting the cup and kissing him. "What are you doing here so early?" "I had a thought last night about our vacation plans. What if instead of going to the beach we went to Ireland? You mentioned wanting to see Dublin and the countryside. I looked into it and there are some great package deals available." Naomi pulled up her calendar again, looking at the dates they had blocked off. "Ireland sounds perfect. Let's do it." They spent a few minutes researching flights and hotels, planning their trip with the easy cooperation of partners who knew each other well. This was what a healthy relationship looked like, Naomi realized. 2 people who respected each other, who made decisions together, who supported each other's dreams and ambitions. Nothing like what she had had with Trevor. After Julian left for his own workday at the hospital, Naomi sat at her desk for a few more minutes before her team started arriving. She thought about how far she had come, about the woman she used to be and the woman she had become. She thought about Trevor serving out his sentence in federal prison, about Sienna doing the same, about how their greed and cruelty had ultimately destroyed them. She felt no joy in their suffering, no pleasure in their imprisonment. She had moved beyond that kind of vindictive satisfaction. But she did feel justice had been served, that they were being held accountable for their crimes, that other potential victims had been protected from their schemes. And more importantly, she felt proud of herself for being the catalyst for that justice. She could have been a passive victim, could have walked away and let Trevor and Sienna destroy Harrison Blake's life. But instead she had fought back, had used her intelligence and determination to stop them, had turned betrayal into something productive and meaningful. That was the legacy she wanted. Not the woman who was betrayed, but the woman who refused to stay down. Not the victim who cried and gave up, but the fighter who stood up and built something better. Not someone defined by what was done to her, but by what she chose to do in response. The office began to fill with employees arriving for their first day in the new building. Naomi could hear excited conversations, people exploring the new space, celebrating this milestone for the company. She stood and smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the window, and prepared to greet her team. She was Naomi Williams, founder and CEO of a successful healthcare consulting firm. She was a respected expert in her field, a good boss who cared about her employees, a woman who made a difference in people's lives through her work. She was also someone who had been profoundly betrayed but had refused to let that betrayal define her future. Both of those things were true. Both of them were part of her story. But the second part, the better part, was the one she chose to focus on. Because the future was always more important than the past, and her future was bright with possibility. Naomi opened her office door and stepped out to greet her team, ready to begin this new chapter of her life. Trevor was behind her, literally and figuratively. What lay ahead was entirely up to her, and she intended to make it extraordinary. 3 years ago, she had hidden in a storage closet and watched her world fall apart. Today, she stood in her own building, surrounded by success she had earned, looking forward to a future she was actively creating. The contrast was stark and beautiful and entirely deserved. She had risen from the ashes of her old life and built something better. She had taken her power back and refused to be defined by someone else's betrayal. She had turned pain into purpose and grief into growth. And she was just getting started.